The Old Street Lamp. Did you ever hear the story of the old street lamp? It is not remarkably interesting, but for once in a way you may as well listen to it. It was a most respectable old lamp which had seen many, many years of service, and now was to retire with a pension. It was this evening at its post for the last time, giving light to the street. His feelings were something like those of an old dancer at the theatre who is dancing for the last time and knows that on the morrow she will be in her garret, alone and forgotten. The lamp had very great anxiety about the next day, for he knew that he had to appear for the first time at the town hall to be inspected by the mayor and the council, who were to decide if he were fit for further service or not, whether the lamp was good enough to be used to light the inhabitants of one of the suburbs, or in the country at some factory, and if not, it would be sent at once to an iron foundry to be melted down. In this latter case, it might be turned into anything, and he wondered very much whether he would then be able to remember that he had once been a street lamp, and it troubled him exceedingly. Whatever might happen, one thing seemed certain, that he would be separated from the watchman and his wife, whose family he looked upon as his own. The lamp had first been hung up on that very evening that the watchman, then a robust young man, had entered upon the duties of his office. Ah, well, it was a very long time since one became a lamp and the other a watchman. His wife had a little pride in those days. She seldom condescended to glance at the lamp, excepting when she passed by in the evening, never in the daytime. But in later years, when all these, the watchman, the wife, and the lamp had grown old, she had attended to it, cleaned it, and supplied it with oil. The old people were thoroughly honest. They had never cheated the lamp of a single drop of the oil provided for it. This was the lamp's last night in the street, and tomorrow he must go to the town hall. Two very dark things to think of. No wonder he did not burn brightly. Many other thoughts also passed through his mind. How many persons he had lighted on their way, and how much he had seen, as much, very likely, as the mayor and corporation themselves. None of these thoughts were uttered aloud, however, for he was a good, honourable old lamp who would not willingly do harm to anyone, especially to those in authority. As many things were recalled to his mind, the light would flash up with sudden brightness. He had, at such moments, a conviction that he would be remembered. There was a handsome young man once, thought he. It is certainly a long while ago, but I remember he had a little note, written on pink paper with a gold edge. The writing was elegant, evidently a lady's hand. Twice he read it through and kissed it, and then looked up at me with eyes that said quite plainly, "I am the happiest of men." Only he and I know what was written on this, his first letter from his lady love. Ah, yes, and there was another pair of eyes that I remember. It is really wonderful how the thoughts jump from one thing to another. A funeral passed through the street. A young and beautiful woman lay on a bier, decked with garlands of flowers and attended by torches, which quite overpowered my light. All along the street stood the people from the houses, in crowds, ready to join the procession. But when the torches had passed from before me, and I could look round, I saw one person alone, standing, leaning against my post and weeping. Never shall I forget the sorrowful eyes that looked up at me. These and similar reflections occupied the old street lamp, on this, the last time that his light would shine. The sentry, when he is relieved from his post, knows at least who will succeed him, and may whisper a few words to him, but the lamp did not know his successor, or he could have given him a few hints respecting rain or mist, and could have informed him how far the moon's rays would rest on the pavement, and from which side the wind generally blew, and so on. On the bridge over the canal stood 3 persons who wished to recommend themselves to the lamp. for they thought he could give the office to whomsoever he chose. The first was a herring's head, which could emit light in the darkness. He remarked that it would be a great saving of oil if they placed him on the lamp-post. Number 2 was a piece of rotten wood, which also shines in the dark. He considered himself descended from an old stem, once the pride of the forest. The third was a glowworm, and how he found his way there the lamp could not imagine. Yet there he was, and could really give light as well as the others. But the rotten wood and the herring's head declared most solemnly, by all they held sacred, that the glowworm only gave light at certain times and must not be allowed to compete with themselves. The old lamp assured them that not one of them could give sufficient light to fill the position of a street lamp, but they would believe nothing he said. And when they discovered that he had not the power of naming his successor, they said they were very glad to hear it, for the lamp was too old and worn out to make a proper choice. At this moment the wind came rushing round the corner of the street, and through the air holes of the old lamp. "What is this I hear," said he, "that you are going away tomorrow? Is this evening the last time we shall meet? Then I must present you with a farewell gift. I will blow into your brain, so that in future you shall not only be able to remember all that you have seen or heard in the past, but your light within shall be so bright that you shall be able to understand all that is said or done in your presence." "Oh, that is really a very, very great gift," said the old lamp. "I thank you most heartily. I only hope I shall not be melted down." "That is not likely to happen yet," said the wind, "and I will also blow a memory into you, so that, should you receive other similar presents, your old age will pass very pleasantly." "That is, if I am not melted down," said the lamp. "But should I in that case still retain my memory?" "Do be reasonable, old lamp," said the wind, puffing away. At this moment the moon burst forth from the clouds. "What will you give the old lamp?" asked the wind. "I can give nothing," she replied. "I am on the wane, and no lamps have ever given me light, while I have frequently shone upon them." And with these words the moon hid herself again behind the clouds, that she might be saved from further importunities. Just then a drop fell upon the lamp from the roof of the house, but the drop explained that he was a gift from those grey clouds, and perhaps the best of all gifts. "I shall penetrate you so thoroughly," he said, "that you will have the power of becoming rusty and, if you wish it, to crumble into dust in one night." But this seemed to the lamp a very shabby present, and the wind thought so too. "Does no one give any more? Will no one give any more?" shouted the breath of the wind as loud as it could. Then a bright falling star came down, leaving a broad, luminous streak behind it. "What was that?" cried the herring's head. "Did not a star fall? I really believe it went into the lamp." Certainly, when such high-born personages try for the office, we may as well say good night and go home. And so they did, all three, while the old lamp threw a wonderfully strong light all around him. "This is a glorious gift," said he. "The bright stars have always been a joy to me, and have always shone more brilliantly than I ever could shine, though I have tried with my whole might. And now they have noticed me, a poor old lamp, and have sent me a gift that will enable me to see clearly everything that I remember, as if it still stood before me, and to be seen by all those who love me. And herein lies the truest pleasure, for joy which we cannot share with others is only half enjoyed." "That sentiment does you honor," said the wind. But for this purpose, wax lights will be necessary. If these are not lighted in you, your particular faculties will not benefit others in the least. The stars have not thought of this. They suppose that you and every other light must be a wax taper, but I must go down now." So he laid himself to rest. "Wax tapers indeed," said the lamp. "I have never yet had these, nor is it likely I ever shall. If I could only be sure of not being melted down." The next day. Well, perhaps we had better pass over the next day. The evening had come, and the lamp was resting in a grandfather's chair, and guess where? Why, at the old watchman's house. He had begged, as a favour, that the mayor and corporation would allow him to keep the street lamp, in consideration of his long and faithful service, as he had himself hung it up and lit it on the day he first commenced his duties, 24 years ago. He looked upon it almost as his own child. He had no children, so the lamp was given to him. There it lay in the great armchair near to the warm stove. It seemed almost as if it had grown larger, for it appeared quite to fill the chair. The old people sat at their supper, casting friendly glances at the old lamp, whom they would willingly have admitted to a place at the table. It is quite true that they dwelt in a cellar, 2 yards deep in the earth, and they had to cross a stone passage to get to their room. But within it was warm and comfortable, and strips of list had been nailed round the door. The bed and the little window had curtains, and everything looked clean and neat. On the window seat stood 2 curious flower pots, which a sailor, named Christian, had brought over from the East or West Indies. They were of clay, and in the form of 2 elephants with open backs. They were hollow and filled with earth. And through the open space flowers bloomed. In one grew some very fine chives or leeks. This was the kitchen garden. The other elephant, which contained a beautiful geranium, they called their flower garden. On the wall hung a large coloured print, representing the Congress of Vienna, and all the kings and emperors at once. A clock, with heavy weights, hung on the wall and went tick, tick, steadily enough, yet it was always rather too fast, which, however, the old people said was better than being too slow. They were now eating their supper, while the old street lamp, as we have heard, lay in the grandfather's armchair near the stove. It seemed to the lamp as if the whole world had turned round. But after a while, the old watchman looked at the lamp, and spoke of what they had both gone through together, in rain and in fog, during the short bright nights of summer, or in the long winter nights through the drifting snowstorms, when he longed to be at home in the cellar. Then the lamp felt it was all right again. He saw everything that had happened quite clearly, as if it were passing before him. Surely the wind had given him an excellent gift. The old people were very active and industrious. They were never idle for even a single hour. On Sunday afternoons they would bring out some books, generally a book of travels which they were very fond of. The old man would read aloud about Africa, with its great forests and the wild elephants, while his wife would listen attentively, stealing a glance now and then at the clay elephants which served as flower pots. "I can almost imagine I am seeing it all," she said, and then how the lamp wished for a wax taper to be lighted in him, for then the old woman would have seen the smallest detail as clearly as he did himself. The lofty trees, with their thickly entwined branches, the naked negroes on horseback, and whole herds of elephants treading down bamboo thickets with their broad, heavy feet. "What is the use of all my capabilities," sighed the old lamp, "when I cannot obtain any wax lights? They have only oil and tallow here, and these will not do." One day, a great heap of wax candle ends found their way into the cellar. The larger pieces were burnt, and the smaller ones the old woman kept for waxing her thread. So there were now candles enough, but it never occurred to anyone to put a little piece in the lamp. "Here I am now with my rare powers," thought the lamp. I have faculties within me, but I cannot share them. They do not know that I could cover these white walls with beautiful tapestry, or change them into noble forests, or, indeed, do anything else they might wish for. The lamp, however, was always kept clean and shining in a corner where it attracted all eyes. Strangers looked upon it as lumber, but the old people did not care for that. They loved the lamp. One day it was the watchman's birthday. The old woman approached the lamp, smiling to herself, and said, "I will have an illumination today in honor of my old man." And the lamp rattled in his metal frame, for he thought, "Now at last I shall have a light within me." But after all, no wax light was placed in the lamp, but oil as usual. The lamp burned through the whole evening, and began to perceive too clearly that the gift of the stars would remain a hidden treasure all his life. Then he had a dream, for, to one with his faculties, dreaming was no difficulty. It appeared to him that the old people were dead, and that he had been taken to the iron foundry to be melted down. It caused him quite as much anxiety as on the day when he had been called upon to appear before the mayor and the council at the town hall. But though he had been endowed with the power of falling into decay from rust when he pleased, he did not make use of it. He was therefore put into the melting furnace and changed into as elegant an iron candlestick as you could wish to see, one intended to hold a wax taper. The candlestick was in the form of an angel holding a nosegay, in the center of which the wax taper was to be placed. It was to stand on a green writing table in a very pleasant room. Many books were scattered about, and splendid paintings hung on the walls. The owner of the room was a poet and a man of intellect. Everything he thought or wrote was pictured around him. Nature showed herself to him sometimes in the dark forests, at others in cheerful meadows where the storks were strutting about, or on the deck of a ship sailing across the foaming sea with the clear blue sky above, or at night the glittering stars. "What powers I possess," said the lamp, awaking from his dream. "I could almost wish to be melted down, but no, that must not be while the old people live. They love me for myself alone. They keep me bright and supply me with oil. I am as well off as the picture of the Congress, in which they take so much pleasure." And from that time he felt at rest in himself, and not more so than such an honourable old lamp really deserved to be. The Pea. Blossom. There were once 5 peas in one shell. They were green, the shell was green, and so they believed that the whole world must be green also, which was a very natural conclusion. The shell grew, and the peas grew. They accommodated themselves to their position, and sat all in a row. The sun shone without and warmed the shell, and the rain made it clear and transparent. It was mild and agreeable in broad daylight and dark at night, as it generally is, and the peas as they sat there grew bigger and more thoughtful as they mused, for they felt there must be something else for them to do. "Are we to sit here forever?" asked one. "Shall we not become hard by sitting so long? It seems to me there must be something outside, and I feel sure of it." And as weeks passed by, the peas became yellow, and the shell became yellow. "All the world is turning yellow, I suppose," said they. And perhaps they were right. Suddenly they felt a pull at the shell. It was torn off, and held in human hands, then slipped into the pocket of a jacket in company with other full pods. "Now we shall soon be opened," said one, just what they all wanted. "I should like to know which of us will travel furthest," said the smallest of the 5. "We shall soon see now." "What is to happen will happen," said the largest pea. Crack went the shell as it burst, and the 5 peas rolled out into the bright sunshine. There they lay in a child's hand. A little boy was holding them tightly, and said they were fine peas for his pea-shooter. And immediately he put one in and shot it out. "Now I am flying out into the wide world," said he. "Catch me if you can." And he was gone in a moment. "I," said the second, "intend to fly straight to the sun. That is a shell that lets itself be seen, and it will suit me exactly." And away he went. "We will go to sleep wherever we find ourselves," said the two next. "We shall still be rolling onwards." And they did certainly fall on the floor and roll about before they got into the pea-shooter, but they were put in for all that. "We shall go farther than the others," said they. "What is to happen will happen," exclaimed the last, as he was shot out of the pea-shooter, and as he spoke, he flew up against an old board under a garret window, and fell into a little crevice which was almost filled up with moss and soft earth. The moss closed itself round him, and there he lay, a captive indeed, but not unnoticed by God. "What is to happen will happen," said he to himself. Within the little garret lived a poor woman, who went out to clean stoves, chop wood into small pieces, and perform such like hard work, for she was strong and industrious. Yet she remained always poor, and at home in the garret lay her only daughter, not quite grown up, and very delicate and weak. For a whole year she had kept her bed, and it seemed as if she could neither live nor die. "She is going to her little sister," said the woman. "I had but the two children, and it was not an easy thing to support both of them. But the good God helped me in my work, and took one of them to himself, and provided for her. Now I would gladly keep the other that was left to me, but I suppose they are not to be separated, and my sick girl will very soon go to her sister above." But the sick girl still remained where she was. Quietly and patiently she lay all the day long, while her mother was away from home at her work. Spring came, and one morning early the sun shone brightly through the little window, and threw its rays over the floor of the room. Just as the mother was going to her work, the sick girl fixed her gaze on the lowest pane of the window. "Mother," she exclaimed, "what can that little green thing be that peeps in at the window? It is moving in the wind." The mother stepped to the window and half opened it. "Oh," she said, "there is actually a little pea which has taken root and is putting out its green leaves. How could it have got into this crack? Well now, here is a little garden for you to amuse yourself with." So the bed of the sick girl was drawn nearer to the window, that she might see the budding plant, and the mother went out to her work. "Mother, I believe I shall get well," said the sick child in the evening. "The sun has shone in here so brightly and warmly today, and the little pea is thriving so well, I shall get on better too, and go out into the warm sunshine again." "God grant it," said the mother. But she did not believe it would be so. But she propped up with the little stick the green plant which had given her child such pleasant hopes of life, so that it might not be broken by the winds. She tied the piece of string to the window-sill and to the upper part of the frame, so that the pea tendrils might twine round it when it shot up. And it did shoot up indeed. It might almost be seen to grow from day to day. "Now really here is a flower coming," said the old woman one morning. And now at last she began to encourage the hope that her sick daughter might really recover. She remembered that for some time the child had spoken more cheerfully, and during the last few days had raised herself in bed in the morning to look with sparkling eyes at her little garden which contained only a single pea plant. A week after, the invalid sat up for the first time a whole hour, feeling quite happy by the open window in the warm sunshine, while outside grew the little plant, and on it a pink pea blossom in full bloom. The little maiden bent down and gently kissed the delicate leaves. This day was to her like a festival. Our Heavenly Father himself has planted that pea and made it grow and flourish to bring joy to you and hope to me, my blessed child," said the happy mother. and she smiled at the flower as if it had been an angel from God. But what became of the other peas? Why, the one who flew out into the wide world and said, "Catch me if you can," fell into a gutter on the roof of a house and ended his travels in the crop of a pigeon. The two lazy ones were carried quite as far, for they also were eaten by pigeons, so they were at least of some use. But the fourth, who wanted to reach the sun, fell into a sink and lay there in the dirty water for days and weeks, till he had swelled to a great size. "I am getting beautifully fat," said the pea. "I expect I shall burst at last. No pea could do more that, I think. I am the most remarkable of all the 5 which were in the shell." And the sink confirmed the opinion. But the young maiden stood at the open garret window. With sparkling eyes and the rosy hue of health on her cheeks, she folded her thin hands over the pea blossom and thanked God for what he had done. "I," said the sink, "shall stand up for my pea." The pen and the inkstand. In a poet's room, where his inkstand stood on the table, the remark was once made, "It is wonderful what can be brought out of an inkstand. What will come next? It is indeed wonderful." "Yes, certainly," said the inkstand to the pen and to the other articles that stood on the table. "That's what I always say. It is wonderful and extraordinary what a number of things come out of me. It's quite incredible, and I really don't know what is coming next when that man dips his pen into me. One drop out of me is enough for half a page of paper. And what cannot half a page contain? From me, all the works of a poet are produced, all those imaginary characters whom people fancy they have known or met, all the deep feeling, the humour, and the vivid pictures of nature. I myself don't understand how it is, for I am not acquainted with nature, but it is certainly in me. From me have gone forth to the world those wonderful descriptions of troops of charming maidens, and of brave knights on prancing steeds, of the halt and the blind. And I know not what more, for I assure you I never think of these things." "There you are right," said the pen, "for you don't think at all. If you did, you would see that you can only provide the means. You give the fluid that I may place upon the paper what dwells in me, and what I wish to bring to light. It is the pen that writes. No man doubts that, and indeed most people understand as much about poetry as an old inkstand." "You have had very little experience," replied the inkstand. "You have hardly been in service a week, and are already half worn out. Do you imagine you are a poet? You are only a servant, and before you came I had many like you, some of the goose family and others of English manufacture. I know a quill pen as well as I know a steel one. I have had both sorts in my service, and I shall have many more when he comes. The man who performs the mechanical part and writes down what he obtains from me. I should like to know what will be the next thing he gets out of me." "Ink pot!" exclaimed the pen contemptuously. Late in the evening the poet came home. He had been to a concert, and had been quite enchanted with the admirable performance of a famous violin player whom he had heard there. The performer had produced from his instrument a richness of tone that sometimes sounded like tinkling water drops or rolling pearls, sometimes like the birds twittering in chorus, and then rising and swelling in sound like the wind through the fir trees. The poet felt as if his own heart were weeping, but in tones of melody like the sound of a woman's voice. It seemed not only the strings, but every part of the instrument from which these sounds were produced. It was a wonderful performance and a difficult piece. And yet the bow seemed to glide across the strings so easily that it was as if anyone could do it who tried. Even the violin and the bow appeared to perform independently of their master who guided them. It was as if soul and spirit had been breathed into the instrument. So the audience forgot the performer in the beautiful sounds he produced. Not so the poet. He remembered him and named him and wrote down his thoughts on the subject. How foolish it would be for the violin and the bow to boast of their performance, and yet we men often commit that folly. The poet, the artist, the man of science in his laboratory, the general, we all do it. And yet we are only the instruments which the Almighty uses. To him alone the honor is due. We have nothing of ourselves of which we should be proud. Yes, this is what the poet wrote down. He wrote it in the form of a parable, and called it The Master and the Instruments. "That is what you have got, madam," said the pen to the inkstand when the two were alone again. "Did you hear him read aloud what I had written down?" "Yes, what I gave you to write," retorted the inkstand. "That was a cut at you because of your conceit. To think that you could not understand that you were being quizzed. I gave you a cut from within me. Surely I must know my own satire." "Ink pitcher?" cried the pen. "Writing stick," retorted the inkstand. And each of them felt satisfied that he had given a good answer. "It is pleasing to be convinced that you have settled the matter by your reply. It is something to make you sleep well," and they both slept well upon it. But the poet did not sleep. Thoughts rose up within him like the tones of the violin, falling like pearls or rushing like the strong wind through the forest. He understood his own heart in these thoughts. They were as a ray from the mind of the great Master of all minds. To him be all the honor. The philosophers. Stone far away towards the east, in India, which seemed in those days the world's end, stood the tree of the sun, a noble tree, such as we have never seen, and perhaps never may see. The summit of this tree spread itself for miles like an entire forest, each of its smaller branches forming a complete tree. Palms, beech trees, pines, plane trees, and various other kinds, which are found in all parts of the world, were here like small branches, shooting forth from the great tree, while the larger boughs, with their knots and curves, formed valleys and hills, clothed with velvety green and covered with flowers. Everywhere it was like a blooming meadow or a lovely garden. Here were birds from all quarters of the world assembled together. Birds from the primeval forests of America, from the rose gardens of Damascus, and from the deserts of Africa, in which the elephant and the lion may boast of being the only rulers. Birds from the polar regions came flying here, and of course the stork and the swallow were not absent. But the birds were not the only living creatures. There were stags, squirrels, antelopes, and hundreds of other beautiful and light-footed animals here found a home. The summit of the tree was a wide-spreading garden, and in the midst of it, where the green boughs formed a kind of hill, stood a castle of crystal, with a view from it towards every quarter of heaven. Each tower was erected in the form of a lily, and within the stern was a winding staircase, through which one could ascend to the top and step out upon the leaves as upon balconies. The calyx of the flower itself formed a most beautiful, glittering, circular hall, above which no other roof arose than the blue firmament and the sun and stars. Just as much splendor, but of another kind, appeared below, in the wide halls of the castle. Here, on the walls, were reflected pictures of the world, which represented numerous and varied scenes of everything that took place daily, so that it was useless to read the newspapers. And indeed there were none to be obtained in this spot. All was to be seen in living pictures by those who wished it. But all would have been too much for even the wisest man, and this man dwelt here. His name is very difficult. You would not be able to pronounce it, so it may be omitted. He knew everything that a man on earth can know or imagine, Every invention already in existence or yet to be was known to him. And much more. Still, everything on earth has a limit. The wise King Solomon was not half so wise as this man. He could govern the powers of nature and held sway over potent spirits. Even death itself was obliged to give him every morning a list of those who were to die during the day. And King Solomon himself had to die at last, and this fact it was which so often occupied the thoughts of this great man in the castle on the tree of the sun. He knew that he also, however high he might tower above other men in wisdom, must one day die. He knew that his children would fade away like the leaves of the forest and become dust. He saw the human race wither and fall like leaves from the tree. He saw new men come to fill their places, but the leaves that fell off never sprouted forth again. They crumbled to dust or were absorbed into other plants. "What happens to man?" asked the wise man of himself when touched by the angel of death. "What can death be?" "The body decays, and the soul." Yes, what is the soul, and whither does it go? "To eternal life," says the comforting voice of religion. But what is this change? Where and how shall we exist? "Above, in heaven," answers the pious man. "It is there we hope to go." "Above," repeated the wise man, fixing his eyes upon the moon and stars above him. He saw that to this earthly sphere above and below were constantly changing places, and that the position varied according to the spot on which a man found himself. He knew also that even if he ascended to the top of the highest mountain which rears its lofty summit on this earth, the air, which to us seems clear and transparent, would there be dark and cloudy, the sun would have a coppery glow and send forth no rays, and our earth would lie beneath him wrapped in an orange-coloured mist. How narrow are the limits which confine the bodily sight, and how little can be seen by the eye of the soul. How little do the wisest among us know of that which is so important to us all. In the most secret chamber of the castle lay the greatest treasure on earth, the Book of Truth. The wise man had read it through page after page. Every man may read in this book, but only in fragments. To many eyes, the characters seem so mixed in confusion that the words cannot be distinguished. On certain pages, the writing often appears so pale or so blurred that the page becomes a blank. The wiser a man becomes, the more he will read, and those who are wisest read most. The wise man knew how to unite the sunlight and the moonlight with the light of reason and the hidden powers of nature. And through this stronger light, many things in the pages were made clear to him. But in the portion of the book entitled Life After Death, not a single point could he see distinctly. This pained him. Should he never be able here on earth to obtain a light by which everything written in the Book of Truth should become clear to him? Like the wise King Solomon, he understood the language of animals and could interpret their talk into song, but that made him none the wiser. He found out the nature of plants and metals, and their power in curing diseases and arresting death, but none to destroy death itself. In all created things within his reach, he sought the light that should shine upon the certainty of an eternal life, but he found it not. The Book of Truth lay open before him, but its pages were to him as blank paper. Christianity placed before him in the Bible a promise of eternal life, but he wanted to read it in his book, in which nothing on the subject appeared to be written. He had 5 children, 4 sons, educated as the children of such a wise father should be, and a daughter, fair, gentle, and intelligent. But she was blind, yet this deprivation appeared as nothing to her. Her father and brothers were outward eyes to her, and a vivid imagination made everything clear to her mental sight. The sons had never gone farther from the castle than the branches of the trees extended, and the sister had scarcely ever left home. They were happy children in that home of their childhood, the beautiful and fragrant tree of the sun. Like all children, they loved to hear stories related to them, and their father told them many things which other children would not have understood. But these were as clever as most grown-up people are among us. He explained to them what they saw in the pictures of life on the castle walls, the doings of man, and the progress of events in all the lands of the earth. And the sons often expressed a wish that they could be present and take a part in these great deeds. Then their father told them that in the world there was nothing but toil and difficulty, that it was not quite what it appeared to them, as they looked upon it in their beautiful home. He spoke to them of the true, the beautiful, and the good, and told them that these three held together in the world, and by that union they became crystallized into a precious jewel, clearer than a diamond of the first water. A jewel whose splendor had a value even in the sight of God, in whose brightness all things are dim. This jewel was called the philosopher's stone. He told them that, by searching, man could attain to a knowledge of the existence of God, and that it was in the power of every man to discover the certainty that such a jewel as the philosopher's stone really existed. This information would have been beyond the perception of other children, but these children understood, and others will learn to comprehend its meaning after a time. They questioned their father about the true, the beautiful, and the good, and he explained it to them in many ways. He told them that God, when he made man out of the dust of the earth, touched his work 5 times, leaving 5 intense feelings, which we call the 5 senses. Through these, the true, the beautiful, and the good are seen, understood, and perceived, and through these they are valued, protected, and encouraged. 5 senses have been given mentally and corporeally, inwardly and outwardly, to body and soul. The children thought deeply on all these things and meditated upon them day and night. Then the eldest of the brothers dreamt a splendid dream. Strange to say, not only the second brother, but also the third and fourth brothers, all dreamt exactly the same thing, namely, that each went out into the world to find the philosopher's stone. Each dreamt that he found it, and that, as he rode back on his swift horse in the morning dawn over the velvety green meadows to his home in the castle of his father, that the stone gleamed from his forehead like a beaming light, and threw such a bright radiance upon the pages of the Book of Truth that every word was illuminated which spoke of the life beyond the grave. But the sister had no dream of going out into the wide world. It never entered her mind. Her world was her father's house. "I shall ride forth into the wide world," said the eldest brother. "I must try what life is like there as I mix with men. I will practice only the good and true. With these I will protect the beautiful. Much shall be changed for the better while I am there." Now, these thoughts were great and daring, as our thoughts generally are at home. Before we have gone out into the world and encountered its storms and tempests, its thorns and its thistles, in him and in all his brothers, the 5 senses were highly cultivated, inwardly and outwardly. But each of them had one sense which in keenness and development surpassed the other 4. In the case of the eldest, this preeminent sense was sight, which he hoped would be of special service. He had eyes for all times and all people, eyes that could discover in the depths of the earth hidden treasures, and look into the hearts of men. As through a pane of glass, he could read more than is often seen on the cheek that blushes or grows pale, in the eye that droops or smiles. Stags and antelopes accompanied him to the western boundary of his home, and there he found the wild swans. These he followed, and found himself far away in the north, far from the land of his father, which extended eastward to the ends of the earth. How he opened his eyes with astonishment! How many things were to be seen here, and so different to the mere representation of pictures such as those in his father's house! At first he nearly lost his eyes in astonishment at the rubbish and mockery brought forward to represent the beautiful, but he kept his eyes, and soon found full employment for them. He wished to go thoroughly and honestly to work in his endeavour to understand the true, the beautiful, and the good. But how were they represented in the world? He observed that the wreath which rightly belonged to the beautiful was often given the hideous, that the good was often passed by unnoticed, while mediocrity was applauded, when it should have been hissed. People look at the dress, not at the wearer, thought more of a name than of doing their duty, and trusted more to reputation than to real service. It was everywhere the same. "I see I must make a regular attack on these things," said he, and he accordingly did not spare them. But while looking for the truth came the evil one, the father of lies, to intercept him. Gladly would the fiend have plucked out the eyes of this seer, but that would have been a too straightforward path for him. He works more cunningly. He allowed the young man to seek for, and discover, the beautiful and the good. But while he was contemplating them, the evil spirit blew one mote after another into each of his eyes, and such a proceeding would injure the strongest sight. Then he blew upon the motes, and they became beams, so that the clearness of his sight was gone, and the seer was like a blind man in the world, and had no longer any faith in it. He had lost his good opinion of the world as well as of himself, and when a man gives up the world, and himself too, it is all over with him. "All over," said the wild swan, who flew across the sea to the east. "All over," twittered the swallows, who were also flying eastward towards the tree of the sun. It was no good news which they carried home. "I think the seer has been badly served," said the second brother, "but the hearer may be more successful." This one possessed the sense of hearing to a very high degree. So acute was this sense that it was said he could hear the grass grow. He took a fond leave of all at home and rode away, provided with good abilities and good intentions. The swallows escorted him, and he followed the swans till he found himself out in the world and far away from home. But he soon discovered that one may have too much of a good thing. His hearing was too fine. He not only heard the grass grow, but could hear every man's heart beat, whether in sorrow or in joy. The whole world was to him like a clockmaker's great workshop, in which all the clocks were going tick, tick, and all the turret clocks striking ding-dong. It was unbearable. For a long time his ears endured it, but at last all the noise and tumult became too much for one man to bear. There were rascally boys of 60 years old, for years do not alone make a man, who raised a tumult, which might have made the hearer laugh, but for the applause which followed, echoing through every street and house, and was even heard in country roads. Falsehood thrust itself forward and played the hypocrite. The bells on the fool's cap jingled, and declared they were church bells, and the noise became so bad for the hearer that he thrust his fingers into his ears. Still, he could hear false notes and bad singing, gossip and idle words, scandal and slander, groaning and moaning, without and within. Heaven help us! He thrust his fingers farther and farther into his ears, till at last the drums burst. And now he could hear nothing more of the true, the beautiful, and the good, for his hearing was to have been the means by which he hoped to acquire his knowledge. He became silent and suspicious, and at last trusted no one. not even himself, and no longer hoping to find and bring home the costly jewel, he gave it up, and gave himself up too, which was worse than all. The birds in their flight towards the east carried the tidings, and the news reached the castle in the Tree of the Sun. "I will try now," said the third brother. "I have a keen nose." Now that was not a very elegant expression, but it was his way, and we must take him as he was. He had a cheerful temper, and was, besides, a real poet. He could make many things appear poetical, by the way in which he spoke of them, and ideas struck him long before they occurred to the minds of others. "I can smell," he would say, and he attributed to the sense of smelling, which he possessed in a high degree, a great power in the region of the beautiful. "I can smell," he would say, and many places are fragrant or beautiful according to the taste of the frequenters. One man feels at home in the atmosphere of the tavern, among the flaring tallow candles, and when the smell of spirits mingles with the fumes of bad tobacco. Another prefers sitting amidst the overpowering scent of jasmine, or perfuming himself with scented olive oil. This man seeks the fresh sea breeze, while that one climbs the lofty mountain top, to look down upon the busy life in miniature beneath him. As he spoke in this way, it seemed as if he had already been out in the world, as if he had already known and associated with man. But this experience was intuitive. It was the poetry within him, a gift from heaven bestowed on him in his cradle. He bade farewell to his parental roof in the Tree of the Sun, and departed on foot from the pleasant scenes that surrounded his home. Arrived at its confines, he mounted on the back of an ostrich, which runs faster than a horse, and afterwards, when he fell in with the wild swans, he swung himself on the strongest of them, for he loved change, and away he flew over the sea to distant lands, where there were great forests, deep lakes, lofty mountains, and proud cities. Wherever he came, it seemed as if sunshine travelled with him across the fields, for every flower, every bush, exhaled a renewed fragrance, as if conscious that a friend and protector was near, one who understood them and knew their value. The stunted rosebush shot forth twigs, unfolded its leaves, and bore the most beautiful roses. Everyone could see it, and even the black, slimy wood snail noticed its beauty. "I will give my seal to the flower," said the snail. "I have trailed my slime upon it. I can do no more." "Thus it always fares with the beautiful in this world," said the poet. And he made a song upon it, and sung it after his own fashion, but nobody listened. Then he gave a drummer twopence and a peacock's feather, and composed a song for the drum, and the drummer beat it through the streets of the town. And when the people heard it, they said, "That is a capital tune." The poet wrote many songs about the true, the beautiful, and the good. His songs were listened to in the tavern, where the tallow candles flared, in the fresh clover field, in the forest, and on the high seas, and it appeared as if this brother was to be more fortunate than the other two. But the evil spirit was angry at this, so he set to work with soot and incense, which he can mix so artfully as to confuse an angel, and how much more easily a poor poet. The evil one knew how to manage such people. He so completely surrounded the poet with incense that the man lost his head, forgot his mission and his home, and at last lost himself and vanished in smoke. But when the little birds heard of it, they mourned, and for 3 days they sang not one song. The black wood snail became blacker still, not for grief, but for envy. "They should have offered me incense," he said, "for it was I who gave him the idea of the most famous of his songs, the drum song of The Way of the World Missed, and it was I who spat at the rose. I can bring a witness to that fact." But no tidings of all this reached the poet's home in India. The birds had all been silent for 3 days, and when the time of mourning was over, so deep had been their grief that they had forgotten for whom they wept. Such is the way of the world. Now I must go out into the world and disappear like the rest, said the fourth brother. He was as good-tempered as the third, but no poet, though he could be witty. The two eldest had filled the castle with joyfulness, and now the last brightness was going away. Sight and hearing have always been considered two of the chief senses among men, and those which they wish to keep bright. The other senses are looked upon as of less importance. But the younger son had a different opinion. He had cultivated his taste in every way, and taste is very powerful. It rules over what goes into the mouth, as well as over all which is presented to the mind, and, consequently, this brother took upon himself to taste everything stored up in bottles or jars. This he called the rough part of his work. Every man's mind was to him as a vessel in which something was concocting, every land a kind of mental kitchen. There are no delicacies here, he said, so he wished to go out into the world to find something delicate to suit his taste. Perhaps fortune may be more favorable to me than it was to my brothers. I shall start on my travels, but what conveyance shall I choose? Are air balloons invented yet? He asked of his father, who knew of all inventions that had been made or would be made. Air balloons had not then been invented, nor steamships, nor railways. Good, said he. Then I shall choose an air balloon. My father knows how they are to be made and guided. Nobody has invented one yet, and the people will believe that it is an aerial phantom. When I have done with the balloon, I shall burn it, and for this purpose you must give me a few pieces of another invention which will come next, I mean a few chemical matches. He obtained what he wanted and flew away. The birds accompanied him farther than they had the other brothers. They were curious to know how this flight would end. Many more of them came swooping down. They thought it must be some new bird, and he soon had a goodly company of followers. They came in clouds, till the air became darkened with birds, as it was with the cloud of locusts over the land of Egypt, and now he was out in the wide world. The balloon descended over one of the greatest cities, and the aeronaut took up his station at the highest point, on the church steeple. The balloon rose again into the air, which it ought not to have done. What became of it is not known, neither is it of any consequence, for balloons had not then been invented. There he sat on the church steeple. The birds no longer hovered over him. They had got tired of him, and he was tired of them. All the chimneys in the town were smoking. "There are altars erected to my honor," said the wind, who wished to say something agreeable to him as he sat there boldly looking down upon the people in the street. There was one stepping along, proud of his purse, another of the key he carried behind him, though he had nothing to lock up, another took a pride in his moth-eaten coat, and another in his mortified body. "Vanity, all vanity," he exclaimed. "I must go down there by and by and touch and taste, but I shall sit here a little while longer, for the wind blows pleasantly at my back. I shall remain here as long as the wind blows and enjoy a little rest. It is comfortable to sleep late in the morning when one had a great deal to do," said the sluggard, "so I shall stop here as long as the wind blows, for it pleases me." And there he stayed. But as he was sitting on the weathercock of the steeple, which kept turning round and round with him, he was under the false impression that the same wind still blew, and that he could stay where he was without expense. But in India, in the castle on the tree of the sun, all was solitary and still, since the brothers had gone away one after the other. "Nothing goes well with them," said the father. They will never bring the glittering jewel home. It is not made for me. They are all dead and gone." Then he bent down over the book of truth and gazed on the page on which he should have read of the life after death. But for him, there was nothing to be read or learned upon it. His blind daughter was his consolation and joy. She clung to him with sincere affection, and for the sake of his happiness and peace, she wished the costly jewel could be found and brought home. With longing tenderness, she thought of her brothers. Where were they? Where did they live? How she wished she might dream of them. But it was strange that not even in dreams could she be brought near to them. But at last, one night, she dreamt that she heard the voices of her brothers calling to her from the distant world, and she could not refrain herself, but went out to them, and yet it seemed in her dream that she still remained in her father's house. She did not see her brothers, but she felt, as it were, a fire burning in her hand, which, however, did not hurt her, for it was the jewel she was bringing to her father. When she awoke, she thought for a moment that she still held the stone, but she only grasped the knob of her distaff. During the long evenings she had spun constantly, and round the distaff were woven threads finer than the web of a spider. Human eyes could never have distinguished these threads when separated from each other, but she had wetted them with her tears, and the twist was as strong as a cable. She rose with the impression that her dream must be a reality, and her resolution was taken. It was still night, and her father slept. She pressed a kiss upon his hand, and then took her distaff and fastened the end of the thread to her father's house. But for this, blind as she was, she would never have found her way home again. To this thread she must hold fast, and trust not to others or even to herself. From the tree of the sun she broke 4 leaves, which she gave up to the wind and the weather, that they might be carried to her brothers as letters and a greeting, in case she did not meet them in the wide world. Poor blind child, what would become of her in those distant regions? But she had the invisible thread, to which she could hold fast, and she possessed a gift which all the others lacked. This was a determination to throw herself entirely into whatever she undertook, and it made her feel as if she had eyes even at the tips of her fingers, and could hear down into her very heart. Quietly she went forth into the noisy, bustling, wonderful world, and wherever she went the skies grew bright, and she felt the warm sunbeam, and a rainbow above in the blue heavens seemed to span the dark world. She heard the song of the birds, and smelt the scent of the orange groves and apple orchards so strongly that she seemed to taste it. Soft tones and charming songs reached her ear, as well as harsh sounds and rough words, thoughts and opinions in strange contradiction to each other. Into the deepest recesses of her heart penetrated the echoes of human thoughts and feelings. Now she heard the following words sadly sung: "Life is a shadow that flits away in a night of darkness and woe." But then would follow brighter thoughts. Life has the rose's sweet perfume, with sunshine, light, and joy. And if one stanza sounded painfully, "Each mortal thinks of himself alone," is a truth, alas, too clearly known. Then, on the other hand, came the answer: "Love, like a mighty flowing stream, fills every heart with its radiant gleam." She heard, indeed, such words as these: "In the pretty turmoil here below, all is a vain and paltry show." Then came also words of comfort: "Great and good are the actions done by many whose worth is never known." And if sometimes the mocking strain reached her, why not join in the jesting cry that contemns all gifts from the throne on high? In the blind girl's heart a stronger voice repeated, "To trust in thyself and God is best, in his holy will for ever to rest." But the evil spirit could not see this, and remained contented. He has more cleverness than 10,000 men, and he found means to compass his end. He betook himself to the marsh, and collected a few little bubbles of stagnant water. Then he uttered over them the echoes of lying words that they might become strong. He mixed up together songs of praise with lying epitaphs, as many as he could find, boiled them in tears shed by envy, put upon them rouge which he had scraped from faded cheeks, and from these he produced a maiden, in form and appearance like the blind girl, the angel of completeness, as men called her. The evil one's plot was successful. The world knew not which was the true, and indeed how should the world know? To trust in thyself and God is best, in his holy will forever to rest. So sung the blind girl in full faith. She had entrusted the 4 green leaves from the tree of the sun to the winds as letters of greeting to her brothers, and she had full confidence that the leaves would reach them. She fully believed that the jewel which outshines all the glories of the world would yet be found, and that upon the forehead of humanity it would glitter even in the castle of her father. "Even in my father's house," she repeated. "Yes, the place in which this jewel is to be found is earth, and I shall bring more than the promise of it with me. I feel it glow and swell more and more in my closed hand. Every grain of truth which the keen wind carried up and whirled towards me, I caught and treasured. I allowed it to be penetrated with the fragrance of the beautiful, of which there is so much in the world, even for the blind. I took the beatings of a heart engaged in a good action and added them to my treasure. All that I can bring is but dust. Still, it is a part of the jewel we seek, and there is plenty. My hand is quite full of it." She soon found herself again at home, carried thither in a flight of thought, never having loosened her hold of the invisible thread fastened to her father's house. As she stretched out her hand to her father, the powers of evil dashed with the fury of a hurricane over the tree of the sun. A blast of wind rushed through the open doors and into the sanctuary, where lay the book of truth. "It will be blown to dust by the wind," said the father, as he seized the open hand she held towards him. "No," she replied, with quiet confidence, "it is indestructible. I feel its beam warming my very soul." Then her father observed that a dazzling flame gleamed from the white page on which the shining dust had passed from her hand. It was there to prove the certainty of eternal life, and on the book glowed one shining word, and only one, the word Bell, and soon the 4 brothers were again with the father and daughter. When the green leaf from home fell on the bosom of each, a longing had seized them to return. They had arrived, accompanied by the birds of passage, the stag, the antelope, and all the creatures of the forest who wished to take part in their joy. We have often seen, when a sunbeam burst through a crack in the door into a dusty room, how a whirling column of dust seems to circle round. But this was not poor, insignificant, common dust, which the blind girl had brought. Even the rainbow's colours are dim when compared with the beauty which shone from the page on which it had fallen. The beaming word, believe, from every grain of truth, had the brightness of the beautiful and the good, more bright than the mighty pillar of flame that led Moses and the children of Israel to the land of Canaan. And from the word believe arose the bridge of hope, reaching even to the unmeasurable, love in the realms of the infinite, the phoenix bird. In the garden of paradise, beneath the tree of knowledge, bloomed a rose bush. Here, in the first rose, a bird was born. His flight was like the flashing of light. His plumage was beauteous, and his song ravishing. But when Eve plucked the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, When she and Adam were driven from paradise, there fell from the flaming sword of the cherub a spark into the nest of the bird, which blazed up forthwith. The bird perished in the flames, but from the red egg in the nest there fluttered aloft a new one, the one solitary phoenix bird. The fable tells that he dwells in Arabia, and that every 100 years he burns himself to death in his nest, but each time a new phoenix, the only one in the world, rises up from the red egg. The bird flutters round us, swift as light, beauteous in colour, charming in song. When a mother sits by her infant's cradle, he stands on the pillow, and with his wings forms a glory around the infant's head. He flies through the chamber of content and brings sunshine into it, and the violets on the humble table smell doubly sweet. But the phoenix is not the bird of Arabia alone. He wings his way in the glimmer of the northern lights over the plains of Lapland, and hops among the yellow flowers in the short Greenland summer. Beneath the copper mountains of Fablun and England's coal mines, he flies, in the shape of a dusty moth, over the hymn book that rests on the knees of the pious miner. On a lotus leaf he floats down the sacred waters of the Ganges, and the eye of the Hindu maid gleams bright when she beholds him. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? The bird of paradise, the holy swan of song. On the car of Thespis he sat in the guise of a chattering raven, and flapped his black wings, smeared with the lees of wine. Over the sounding harp of Iceland swept the swan's red beak. On Shakespeare's shoulder he sat in the guise of Odin's raven, and whispered in the poet's ear, "Immortality." And at the minstrel's feast he fluttered through the halls of the Wartburg. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? He sang to thee the Marseillaise, and thou kissedst the pen that fell from his wing. He came in the radiance of paradise, and perchance thou didst turn away from him towards the sparrow who sat with tinsel on his wings. The bird of paradise, renewed each century, born in flame, ending in flame, in a golden frame, hangs in the halls of the rich, but thou thyself often fliest around, lonely and disregarded, a myth. The Phoenix of Arabia. In paradise, when thou wert born in the first rose, beneath the tree of knowledge, thou receivedst a kiss, and thy right name was given thee, thy name Poetry, the porter's son. The general lived in the grand first floor, and the porter lived in the cellar. There was a great distance between the two families, the whole of the ground floor, and the difference in rank. But they lived in the same house, and both had a view of the street and of the courtyard. In the courtyard was a grass plot, on which grew a blooming acacia tree when it was in bloom, and under this tree sat occasionally the finely dressed nurse, with the still more finely dressed child of the general, little Emily. Before them danced about barefoot the little son of the porter, with his great brown eyes and dark hair, and the little girl smiled at him, and stretched out her hands towards him, and when the general saw that from the window, he would nod his head and cry, "Charming!" The general's lady, who was so young that she might very well have been her husband's daughter from an early marriage, never came to the window that looked upon the courtyard. She had given orders, though, that the boy might play his antics to amuse her child, but must never touch it. The nurse punctually obeyed the gracious lady's orders. The sun shone in upon the people in the grand first floor, and upon the people in the cellar. The acacia tree was covered with blossoms, and they fell off, and next year new ones came. The tree bloomed, and the porter's little son bloomed too, and looked like a fresh tulip. The general's little daughter became delicate and pale, like the leaf of the acacia blossom. She seldom came down to the tree now, for she took the air in a carriage. She drove out with her mamma, and then she would always nod at the porters. George, Yes, she used even to kiss her hand to him, till her mamma said she was too old to do that now. One morning, George was sent up to carry the general the letters and newspapers that had been delivered at the porter's room in the morning. As he was running upstairs, just as he passed the door of the sandbox, he heard a faint piping. He thought it was some young chicken that had strayed there, and was raising cries of distress. But it was the general's little daughter, decked out in lace and finery. "Don't tell Papa and Mamma," she whimpered. "They would be angry." "What's the matter, little missy?" asked George. "It's all on fire," she answered. "It's burning with a bright flame." George hurried upstairs to the general's apartments. He opened the door of the nursery. The window curtain was almost entirely burnt, and the wooden curtain pole was one mass of flame. George sprang upon a chair he brought in haste and pulled down the burning articles. He then alarmed the people. But for him, the house would have been burned down. The general and his lady cross-questioned little Emily. "I only took just one lucifer match," she said, "and it was burning directly, and the curtain was burning too. I spat at it to put it out. I spat at it as much as ever I could. But I could not put it out, so I ran away and hid myself, for Papa and Mamma would be angry." "I spat!" cried the general's lady. What an expression! Did you ever hear your Papa and Mamma talk about spitting? You must have got that from downstairs. And George had a penny given him. But this penny did not go to the baker's shop, but into the savings box. And soon there were so many pennies in the savings box that he could buy a paint box and colour the drawings he made, and he had a great number of drawings. They seemed to shoot out of his pencil and out of his fingers' ends. His first coloured pictures he presented to Emily. "Charming," said the general, and even the general's lady acknowledged that it was easy to see what the boy had meant to draw. "He has genius." Those were the words that were carried down into the cellar. The general and his gracious lady were grand people. They had 2 coats of arms on their carriage, a coat of arms for each of them, and the gracious lady had had this coat of arms embroidered on both sides of every bit of linen she had, and even on her nightcap and her dressing bag. One of the coats of arms, the one that belonged to her, was a very dear one. It had been bought for hard cash by her father, for he had not been born with it, nor had she. She had come into the world too early, 7 years before the coat of arms, and most people remembered this circumstance, but the family did not remember it. A man might well have a bee in his bonnet when he had such a coat of arms to carry as that, let alone having to carry 2. And the general's wife had a bee in hers when she drove to the court ball, as stiff and as proud as you please. The general was old and grey, but he had a good seat on horseback, and he knew it, and he rode out every day with a groom behind him at a proper distance. When he came to a party, he looked somehow as if he were riding into the room upon his high horse, and he had orders too. Such a number that no one would have believed it. But that was not his fault. As a young man, he had taken part in the great autumn reviews which were held in those days. He had an anecdote that he told about those days, the only one he knew. A subaltern under his orders had cut off one of the princes and taken him prisoner, and the prince had been obliged to ride through the town with a little band of captured soldiers, himself a prisoner behind the general. This was an ever memorable event, and was always told over and over again every year by the general, who, moreover, always repeated the remarkable words he had used when he returned his sword to the prince. Those words were, "Only my subaltern could have taken your highness prisoner. I could never have done it." And the prince had replied, "You are incomparable." In a real war, the general had never taken part. When war came into the country, he had gone on a diplomatic career to foreign courts. He spoke the French language so fluently that he had almost forgotten his own. He could dance well, he could ride well, and orders grew on his coat in an astounding way. The sentries presented arms to him. One of the most beautiful girls presented arms to him, and became the general's lady, and in time they had a pretty, charming child. That seemed as if it had dropped from heaven. It was so pretty, and the porter's son danced before it in the courtyard as soon as it could understand it, and gave her all his coloured pictures, and little Emily looked at them, and was pleased, and tore them to pieces. She was pretty and delicate indeed. "My little rose-leaf," cried the general's lady, "thou art born to wed a prince." The prince was already at the door, but they knew nothing of it. People don't see far beyond the threshold. "The day before yesterday, our boy divided his bread and butter with her," said the porter's wife. "There was neither cheese nor meat upon it, but she liked it as well as if it had been roast beef. There would have been a fine noise if the general and his wife had seen the feast, but they did not see it. George had divided his bread and butter with little Emily, and he would have divided his heart with her if it would have pleased her. He was a good boy, brisk and clever, and he went to the night school in the academy now to learn to draw properly. Little Emily was getting on with her education too, for she spoke French with her bonne and had a dancing master. "George will be confirmed at Easter," said the porter's wife, for George had got so far as this. "It would be the best thing now to make an apprentice of him," said his father. "It must be to some good calling, and then he would be out of the house." "He would have to sleep out of the house," said George's mother. "It is not easy to find a master who has room for him at night, and we shall have to provide him with clothes too. The little bit of eating that he wants can be managed for him, for he's quite happy with a few boiled potatoes, and he gets taught for nothing. Let the boy go his own way. You will say that he will be our joy some day, and the professor says so too." The confirmation suit was ready. The mother had worked it herself, but the tailor who did repairs had cut them out, and a capital cutter out he was. If he had had a better position, and been able to keep a workshop and journeyman, the porter's wife said, he might have been a court tailor. The clothes were ready, and the candidate for confirmation was ready. On his confirmation day, George received a great pinchbeck watch from his godfather, the old ironmonger's shopman, the richest of his godfathers. The watch was an old and tried servant. It always went too fast, but that is better than to be lagging behind. That was a costly present. And from the general's apartment there arrived a hymn book bound in morocco, sent by the little lady to whom George had given pictures. At the beginning of the book his name was written, and her name as his gracious patroness. These words had been written at the dictation of the general's lady, and the general had read the inscription and pronounced it charming. "That is really a great attention from a family of such position," said the porter's wife. And George was sent upstairs to show himself in his confirmation clothes, with the hymn book in his hand. The general's lady was sitting very much wrapped up, and had the bad headache she always had when time hung heavy upon her hands. She looked at George very pleasantly, and wished him all prosperity, and that he might never have her headache. The general was walking about in his dressing gown. He had a cap, with a long tassel on his head, and Russian boots with red tops on his feet. He walked 3 times up and down the room, absorbed in his own thoughts and recollections, and then stopped and said, "So little George is a confirmed Christian now. Be a good man, and honour those in authority over you. Some day, when you are an old man, you can say that the general gave you this precept." That was a longer speech than the general was accustomed to make, and then he went back to his ruminations and looked very aristocratic. But of all that George heard and saw up there, little Miss Emily remained most clear in his thoughts. How graceful she was, how gentle and fluttering and pretty she looked. If she were to be drawn, it ought to be on a soap bubble. About her dress, about her yellow curled hair, there was a fragrance, as of a fresh-blown rose, and to think that he had once divided his bread and butter with her, and that she had eaten it with enormous appetite, and nodded to him at every second mouthful. Did she remember anything about it? Yes, certainly, for she had given him the beautiful hymn book in remembrance of this. And when the first new moon in the first new year after this event came round, he took a piece of bread, a penny, and his hymn book, and went out into the open air and opened the book to see what psalm he should turn up. It was a psalm of praise and thanksgiving. Then he opened the book again to see what would turn up for little Emily. He took great pains not to open the book in the place where the funeral hymns were, and yet he got one that referred to the grave and death. But then he thought, this was not a thing in which one must believe, for all that he was startled when soon afterwards the pretty little girl had to lie in bed, and the doctor's carriage stopped at the gate every day. "They will not keep her with them," said the porter's wife. "The good God knows whom he will summon to himself." But they kept her after all, and George drew pictures and sent them to her. He drew the Tsar's palace, the old Kremlin at Moscow, just as it stood, with towers and cupolas, and these cupolas looked like gigantic green and gold cucumbers, at least in George's drawing. Little Emily was highly pleased, and consequently, when a week had elapsed, George sent her a few more pictures, all with buildings in them, for, you see, she could imagine all sorts of things inside the windows and doors. He drew a Chinese house, with bells hanging from every one of 16 stories. He drew 2 Grecian temples with slender marble pillars and with steps all round them. He drew a Norwegian church. It was easy to see that this church had been built entirely of wood, hewn out and wonderfully put together. Every story looked as if it had rockers, like a cradle. But the most beautiful of all was the castle, drawn on one of the leaves, and which he called Emily's castle. This was the kind of place in which she must live. That is what George had thought, and consequently he had put into this building whatever he thought most beautiful in all the others. It had carved woodwork, like the Norwegian church, marble pillars, like the Grecian temple, bells in every story, and was crowned with cupolas, green and gilded, like those of the Kremlin of the Tsar. It was a real child's castle, and under every window was written what the hall or the room inside was intended to be. For instance, here Emily sleeps, here Emily dances, here Emily plays at receiving visitors. It was a real pleasure to look at the castle, and right well was the castle looked at accordingly. "Charming," said the general. But the old count, for there was an old count there, who was still grander than the general, and had a castle of his own, said nothing at all. He heard that it had been designed and drawn by the porter's little son. Not that he was so very little either, for he had already been confirmed. The old count looked at the pictures, and had his own thoughts as he did so. One day, when it was very gloomy, grey, wet weather, the brightest of days dawned for George, for the professor at the academy called him into his room. "Listen to me, my friend," said the professor. "I want to speak to you. The Lord has been good to you in giving you abilities, and he has also been good in placing you among kind people. The old count at the corner yonder has been speaking to me about you. I have also seen your sketches, but we will not say any more about those, for there is a good deal to correct in them. But from this time forward you may come twice a week to my drawing class, and then you will soon learn how to do them better. I think there's more of the architect than of the painter in you. You will have time to think that over, but go across to the old count this very day, and thank God for having sent you such a friend. It was a great house, the house of the old Count at the corner. Round the windows, elephants and dromedaries were carved, all from the old times, but the old Count loved the new time best, and what it brought, whether it came from the first floor, or from the cellar, or from the attic. "I think," said the porter's wife, "the grander people are, the fewer airs do they give themselves. How kind and straightforward the old Count is. And he talks exactly like you and me. Now, the General and his lady can't do that. And George was fairly wild with delight yesterday at the good reception he met with at the Count's, and so am I today." After speaking to the great man, "Wasn't it a good thing that we didn't bind George apprentice to a handicraftsman, for he has abilities of his own? But they must be helped on by others," said the father. "That help he has got now," rejoined the mother, "for the Count spoke out quite clearly and distinctly." "But I fancy it began with the General," said the father, "and we must thank them too." "Let us do so with all my heart," cried the mother, "though I fancy we have not much to thank them for. I will thank the good God, and I will thank him too for letting little Emily get well." Emily was getting on bravely, and George got on bravely too. In the course of the year he won the little silver prize medal of the Academy, and afterwards he gained the great one too. "It would have been better, after all, if he had been apprenticed to a handicraftsman," said the porter's wife, weeping, "for then we could have kept him with us. What is he to do in Rome? I shall never get a sight of him again, not even if he comes back. But that he won't do, the dear boy." "It is fortune and fame for him," said the father. "Yes, thank you, my friend," said the mother. "You are saying what you do not mean. You are just as sorrowful as I am." And it was all true about the sorrow and the journey, but everybody said it was a great piece of good fortune for the young fellow. And he had to take leave, and of the General too. The General's lady did not show herself, for she had her bad headache. On this occasion the General told his only anecdote about what he had said to the Prince, and how the Prince had said to him, "You are incomparable." And he held out a languid hand to George. Emily gave George her hand too, and looked almost sorry, and George was the most sorry of all. Time goes by when one has something to do, and it goes by too when one has nothing to do. The time is equally long, but not equally useful. It was useful to George, and did not seem long at all, except when he happened to be thinking of his home. How might the good folks be getting on, upstairs and downstairs? Yes, there was writing about that, and many things can be put into a letter. Bright sunshine and dark, heavy days. Both of these were in the letter which brought the news that his father was dead, and that his mother was alone now. She wrote that Emily had come down to see her, and had been to her like an angel of comfort, and concerning herself, she added that she had been allowed to keep her situation as porteress. The General's lady kept a diary, and in this diary was recorded every ball she attended, and every visit she received. The diary was illustrated by the insertion of the visiting cards of the diplomatic circle and of the most noble families, and the General's lady was proud of it. The diary kept growing through a long time, and amid many severe headaches, and through a long course of half-nights, that is to say, of court balls. Emily had now been to a court ball for the first time. Her mother had worn a bright red dress with black lace in the Spanish style. The daughter had been attired in white, fair and delicate. Green silk ribbons fluttered like flag leaves among her yellow locks, and on her head she wore a wreath of water, lilies. Her eyes were so blue and clear, her mouth was so delicate and red, she looked like a little water spirit, as beautiful as such a spirit can be imagined. The princes danced with her, one after another, of course, and the general's lady had not a headache for a week afterwards. But the first ball was not the last, and Emily could not stand it. It was a good thing, therefore, that summer brought with it rest and exercise in the open air. The family had been invited by the old count to visit him at him castle. That was a castle with a garden which was worth seeing. Part of this garden was laid out quite in the style of the old days, with stiff green hedges. You walked as if between green walls with peepholes in them. Box trees and yew trees stood there, trimmed into the form of stars and pyramids, and water sprang from fountains in large grottos lined with shells. All around stood figures of the most beautiful stone, that could be seen in their clothes as well as in their faces. Every flower bed had a different shape, and represented a fish, or a coat of arms, or a monogram. That was the French part of the garden, and from this part the visitor came into what appeared like the green, fresh forest, where the trees might grow as they chose, and accordingly they were great and glorious. The grass was green and beautiful to walk on, and it was regularly cut, and rowed, and swept, and tended. That was the English part of the garden. "Old time and new time," said the Count. "Here they run well into one another. In 2 years the building itself will put on a proper appearance. There will be a complete metamorphosis in beauty and improvement. I shall show you the drawings, and I shall show you the architect, for he is to dine here today." "Charming," said the general. "'Tis like paradise here," said the general's lady. "And yonder you have a knight's castle." "That's my poultry house," observed the Count. "The pigeons live in the tower, the turkeys in the first floor, but old Elsie rules in the ground floor. She has apartments on all sides of her. The sitting hens have their own room, and the hens with chickens have theirs, and the ducks have their own particular door leading to the water." "Charming," repeated the general. And all sailed forth to see these wonderful things. Old Elsie stood in the room on the ground floor, and by her side stood architect George. He and Emily now met for the first time after several years, and they met in the poultry house. Yes, there he stood, and was handsome enough to be looked at. His face was frank and energetic, he had black shining hair, and a smile about his mouth, which said, "I have a brownie that sits in my ear and knows every one of you, inside and out." Old Elsie had pulled off her wooden shoes and stood there in her stockings to do honour to the noble guests. The hens clucked, and the cocks crowed, and the ducks waddled to and fro, and said, "Quack, quack." But the fair, pale girl, the friend of his childhood, the daughter of the general, stood there with a rosy blush on her usually pale cheeks, and her eyes opened wide, and her mouth seemed to speak without uttering a word, and the greeting he received from her was the most beautiful greeting a young man can desire from a young lady, if they are not related, or have not danced many times together, and she and the architect had never danced together. The Count shook hands with him and introduced him. "He is not altogether a stranger, our young friend George." The general's lady bowed to him, and the general's daughter was very nearly giving him her hand, but she did not give it to him. "Our little Master George," said the general. "Old friends. Charming." "You have become quite an Italian," said the general's lady, "and I presume you speak the language like a native." "My wife sings the language, but she does not speak it," observed the general. At dinner, George sat at the right hand of Emily, whom the general had taken down, while the Count led in the general's lady. Mr. George talked and told of his travels, and he could talk well, and was the life and soul of the table, though the old Count could have been it too. Emily sat silent, but she listened, and her eyes gleamed, but she said nothing. in the veranda, among the flowers. She and George stood together. The rose bushes concealed them. And George was speaking again, for he took the lead now. "Many thanks for the kind consideration you showed my old mother," he said. "I know that you went down to her on the night when my father died, and you stayed with her till his eyes were closed. My heartiest thanks." He took Emily's hand and kissed it. He might do so on such an occasion. She blushed deeply, but pressed his hand and looked at him with her dear blue eyes. "Your mother was a dear soul," she said. "How fond she was of her son. And she let me read all your letters, so that I almost believe I know you. How kind you were to me when I was a little girl. You used to give me pictures." "Which you tore in two," said George. "No, I have still your drawing of the castle." "I must build the castle in reality now," said George, and he became quite warm at his own words. The general and the general's lady talked to each other in their room about the porter's son, how he knew how to behave and to express himself with the greatest propriety. "He might be a tutor," said the general. "Intellect," said the general's lady, but she did not say anything more. During the beautiful summertime, Mr. Say, George several times visited the Count at his castle, and he was missed when he did not come. "How much the good God has given you, that he has not given to us poor mortals," said Emily to him. "Are you sure you are very grateful for it?" It flattered George that the lovely young girl should look up to him, and he thought then that Emily had unusually good abilities. And the general felt more and more convinced that George was no cellar child. "His mother was a very good woman," he observed. "It is only right. I should do her the justice now she is in her grave." The summer passed away, and the winter came. Again there was talk about Mr. George. He was highly respected, and was received in the first circles. The general had met him at a court ball, and now there was a ball to be given in the general's house for Emily. And could Mr. George be invited to it? "He whom the king invites can be invited by the general also," said the general, and drew himself up till he stood quite an inch higher than before. Mr. George was invited, and he came. Princes and counts came, and they danced, one better than the other. But Emily could only dance one dance, the first, for she made a false step. Nothing of consequence, but her foot hurt her, so that she had to be careful and leave off dancing and look at the others. So she sat and looked on, and the architect stood by her side. "I suppose you are giving her the whole history of St. Peter's," said the general as he passed by, and smiled, like the personification of patronage. With the same patronizing smile he received Mr. George a few days afterwards. The young man came, no doubt, to return thanks for the invitation to the ball. What else could it be? But indeed there was something else, something very astonishing and startling. He spoke words of sheer lunacy, so that the general could hardly believe his own ears. It was the height of rhodomontade, an offer, quite an inconceivable offer. "Mr. George came to ask the hand of Emily in marriage." "Man," cried the general, and his brain seemed to be boiling, "I don't understand you at all. What is it you say? What is it you want? I don't know you." "Sir." "Man, what possesses you to break into my house? And am I to stand here and listen to you?" He stepped backwards into his bedroom, locked the door behind him, and left Mr. George standing alone. George stood still for a few minutes and then turned round and left the room. Emily was standing in the corridor. "My father has answered," she said, and her voice trembled. George pressed her hand. "He has escaped me," he replied, "but a better time will come." There were tears in Emily's eyes, but in the young man's eyes shone courage and confidence, and the sun shone through the window and cast his beams on the pair, and gave them his blessing. The general sat in his room bursting hot. Yes, he was still boiling until he boiled over in the exclamation, "Lunacy! Porter! Madness!" Not an hour was over before the general's lady knew it out of the general's own mouth. She called Emily and remained alone with her. "You poor child," she said, "to insult you so, to insult us so. There are tears in your eyes too, but they become you well. You look beautiful in tears. You look as I looked on my wedding day. Weep on, my sweet Emily." "Yes, that I must," said Emily, "if you and my father do not say yes." "Child," screamed the general's lady, "you are ill. You are talking wildly, and I shall have a most terrible headache. Oh, what a misfortune is coming upon our house. Don't make your mother die, Emily, or you will have no mother." And the eyes of the general's lady were wet, for she could not bear to think of her own death. In the newspapers there was an announcement. "Mr. George has been elected Professor of the 5th class, number 8. It's a pity that his parents are dead and cannot read it," said the Newporter people, who now lived in the cellar under the general's apartments. They knew that the professor had been born and grown up within their 4 walls. "Now he'll get a salary," said the man. "Yes, that's not much for a poor child," said the woman. $18 a year," said the man. "Why, it's a good deal of money." "No, I mean the honor of it," replied the wife. "Do you think he cares for the money? Those few dollars he can earn 100 times over, and most likely he'll get a rich wife into the bargain. If we had children of our own, husband, our child should be an architect and a professor too. George was spoken well of in the cellar, and he was spoken well of in the 1st floor. The old count took upon himself to do that. The pictures he had drawn in his childhood gave occasion for it. But how did the conversation come to turn on these pictures? Why, they had been talking of Russia and of Moscow, and thus mention was made of the Kremlin, which little George had once drawn for Miss Emily. He had drawn many pictures, but the Count especially remembered one, Emily's castle, where she was to sleep and to dance and to play at receiving guests. "The professor was a true man," said the Count, "and would be a privy councillor before he died. It was not at all unlikely, and he might build a real castle for the young lady before that time came. Why not?" "That was a strange jest," remarked the general's lady, when the Count had gone away. The general shook his head thoughtfully, and went out for a ride, with his groom behind him at a proper distance, and he sat more stiffly than ever on his high horse. It was Emily's birthday. Flowers, books, letters, and visiting cards came pouring in. The general's lady kissed her on the mouth, and the general kissed her on the forehead. They were affectionate parents, and they and Emily had to receive grand visitors, 2 of the princes. They talked of balls and theatres, of diplomatic missions, of the government of empires and nations, and then they spoke of talent, native talent, and so the discourse turned upon the young architect. "He is building up an immortality for himself," said one, "and he will certainly build his way into one of our first families." "One of our first families," repeated the general, and afterwards the general's lady. "What is meant by one of our first families?" "I know for whom it was intended," said the general's lady, "but I shall not say it. I don't think it. Heaven disposes, but I shall be astonished." "I am astonished also," said the general. "I haven't an idea in my head." And he fell into a reverie, waiting for ideas. There is a power, a nameless power, in the possession of favour from above, the favour of Providence, and this favour little George had. But we are forgetting the birthday. Emily's room was fragrant with flowers. Sent by male and female friends, on the table lay beautiful presents for greeting and remembrance. But none could come from George. None could come from him, But it was not necessary, for the whole house was full of remembrances of him. Even out of the ash-bin the blossom of memory peeped forth, for Emily had sat whimpering there on the day when the window curtain caught fire and George arrived in the character of fire engine. A glance out of the window and the acacia tree reminded of the days of childhood. Flowers and leaves had fallen, but there stood the tree covered with hoarfrost, looking like a single huge branch of coral, and the moon shone clear and large among the twigs, unchanged in its changings, as it was when George divided his bread and butter with little Emily. Out of a box the girl took the drawings of the Tsar's palace and of her own castle, remembrances of George. The drawings were looked at, and many thoughts came. She remembered the day when, unobserved by her father and mother, she had gone down to the porter's wife who lay dying. Once again she seemed to sit beside her, holding the dying woman's hand in hers, hearing the dying woman's last words, "Blessing George." The mother was thinking of her son, and now Emily gave her own interpretation to those words. Yes, George was certainly with her on her birthday. It happened that the next day was another birthday in that house, the General's birthday. He had been born the day after his daughter, but before her, of course, many years before her. Many presents arrived, and among them came a saddle of exquisite workmanship, a comfortable and costly saddle. One of the princes had just such another. Now, from whom might this saddle come? The general was delighted. There was a little note with the saddle. Now, if the words on the note had been "Many thanks for yesterday's reception," we might easily have guessed from whom it came. But the words were, "From somebody whom the general does not know." "Whom in the world do I not know?" exclaimed the general. "I know everybody." And his thoughts wandered all through society, for he knew everybody there. "That saddle comes from my wife," he said at last. "She is teasing me. Charming." But she was not teasing him. Those times were past. Again there was a feast, but it was not in the general's house. It was a fancy ball at the prince's, and masks were allowed too. The general went, as Rubens, in a Spanish costume, with a little ruff round his neck, a sword by his side, and a stately manner. The general's lady was Madame Rubens, in black velvet made high round the neck, exceedingly warm, and with a millstone round her neck in the shape of a great ruff, accurately dressed after a Dutch picture in the possession of the general, in which the hands were especially admired. They were just like the hands of the general's lady. Emily was Psyche. In white crepe and lace she was like a floating swan. She did not want wings at all. She only wore them as emblematic of Psyche. Brightness, splendour, light and flowers, wealth and taste appeared at the ball. There was so much to see, that the beautiful hands of Madame Rubens made no sensation at all. A black domino with an acacia blossom in his cap danced with Psyche. "Who is that?" asked the general's lady. "His Royal Highness," replied the general. "I am quite sure of it. I knew him directly by the pressure of his hand." The general's lady doubted it. General Rubens had no doubts about it. He went up to the black domino and wrote the royal letters in the mask's hand. These were denied, but the mask gave him a hint. The words that came with the saddle, "One whom you do not know, General." "But I do know you," said the general. "It was you who sent me the saddle." The domino raised his hand and disappeared among the other guests. "Who is that black domino with whom you were dancing, Emily?" asked the general's lady. "I did not ask his name," she replied, "because you knew it. It is the professor." "Your protégé is here, Count," she continued, turning to that nobleman, who stood close by. "A black domino with acacia blossoms in his cap." "Very likely, my dear lady," replied the Count, but one of the princes wears just the same costume." "I knew the pressure of the hand," said the general. "The saddle came from the prince. I am so certain of it that I could invite that domino to dinner." "Do so. If it be the prince, he will certainly come," replied the count. "And if it is the other, he will not come," said the general, and approached the black domino, who was just speaking with the king. The general gave a very respectful invitation that they might make each other's acquaintance, and he smiled in his certainty concerning the person he was inviting. He spoke loud and distinctly. The domino raised his mask, and it was George. "Do you repeat your invitation, General?" he asked. The general certainly seemed to grow an inch taller, assumed a more stately demeanour, and took 2 steps backward and 1 step forward, as if he were dancing a minuet, and then came as much gravity and expression into the face of the general as the general could contrive to infuse into it. But he replied, "I never retract my words. You are invited, Professor." And he bowed with a glance at the king, who must have heard the whole dialogue. Now, there was a company to dinner at the general's, but only the old count and his protégé were invited. "I have my foot under his table," thought George. "That's laying the foundation stone." And the foundation stone was really laid, with great ceremony, at the house of the general and of the general's lady. The man had come, and had spoken quite like a person in good society, and had made himself very agreeable, so that the general had often to repeat his "charming." The general talked of this dinner, talked of it even to a court lady, and this lady, one of the most intellectual persons about the court, asked to be invited to meet the professor the next time he should come. So he had to be invited again, and he was invited, and came, and was charming again. He could even play chess. "He's not out of the cellar," said the general. "He's quite a distinguished person." "There are many distinguished persons of that kind, and it's no fault of his." The professor, who was received in the king's palace, might very well be received by the general, but that he could ever belong to the house was out of the question. Only the whole town was talking of it. He grew and grew. The dew of favour fell from above, so no one was surprised after all that he should become a privy councillor, and Emily a privy councillor's lady. "Life is either a tragedy or a comedy," said the general. "In tragedies they die, in comedies they marry one another. In this case they married. And they had 3 clever boys, but not all at once. The sweet children rode on their hobby horses through all the rooms when they came to see the grandparents, and the general also rode on his stick. He rode behind them in the character of groom to the little privy councillors, and the general's lady sat on her sofa and smiled at them, even when she had her severest headache. So far did George get, and much further, else it had not been worth while to tell the story of the porter's son, the Portugee. A duck once arrived from Portugal, but there were some who said she came from Spain, which is almost the same thing. At all events, she was called the Portuguese, and she laid eggs, was killed and cooked, and there was an end of her. But the ducklings which crept forth from the eggs were also called Portuguese, and about that there may be some question. But of all the family, one only remained in the duckyard, which may be called a farmyard, as the chickens were admitted, and the cock strutted about in a very hostile manner. "He annoys me with his loud crowing," said the Portuguese duck, "but still, he's a handsome bird, there's no denying that, although he's not a drake. He ought to moderate his voice, like those little birds who are singing in the lime trees over there in our neighbour's garden. But that is an art only acquired in polite society. How sweetly they sing there! It is quite a pleasure to listen to them. I call it Portuguese singing. If I had only such a little singing bird, I'd be kind and good as a mother to him, for it's in my nature, in my Portuguese blood." While she was speaking, one of the little singing birds came tumbling head over heels from the roof into the yard. The cat was after him, but he had escaped from her with a broken wing, and so came tumbling into the yard. "That's just like the cat, she's a villain," said the Portuguese duck. "I remember her ways when I had children of my own. How can such a creature be allowed to live and wander about upon the roofs? I don't think they allow such things in Portugal." She pitied the little singing bird, and so did all the other ducks who were not Portuguese. "Poor little creature," they said, one after another as they came up. "We can't sing, certainly, but we have a sounding board or something of the kind within us. We can feel that, though we don't talk about it." "But I can talk," said the Portuguese duck, "and I'll do something for the little fellow. It's my duty." And she stepped into the water trough and beat her wings upon the water so strongly that the bird was nearly drowned by a shower bath, but the duck meant it kindly. "That is a good deed," she said. "I hope the others will take example by it." "Tweet, tweet," said the little bird, for one of his wings being broken, he found it difficult to shake himself, but he quite understood that the bath was meant kindly, and he said, "You are very kind-hearted, madam," but he did not wish for a second bath. "I have never thought about my heart," replied the Portuguese duck, "but I know that I love all my fellow creatures, except the cat, and nobody can expect me to love her, for she ate up 2 of my ducklings. But pray make yourself at home. It is easy to make oneself comfortable. I am myself from a foreign country. As you may see by my feathery dress, my drake is a native of these parts. He's not of my race, but I am not proud on that account. If anyone here can understand you, I may say positively, I am that person." "She's quite full of portulac," said a little common duck who was witty. All the common ducks considered the word portulac a good joke, for it sounded like Portugal. They nudged each other and said, "Quack, that was witty." Then the other ducks began to notice the little bird. "The Portuguese had certainly a great flow of language," they said to the little bird. "For our part, we don't care to fill our beaks with such long words, but we sympathize with you quite as much. If we don't do anything else, we can walk about with you everywhere, and we think that is the best thing we can do." "You have a lovely voice," said one of the eldest ducks. "It must be great satisfaction to you to be able to give so much pleasure as you do. I am certainly no judge of your singing, so I keep my beak shut, which is better than talking nonsense, as others do." "Don't plague him so," interposed the Portuguese duck. "He requires rest and nursing. My little singing bird, do you wish me to prepare another bath for you?" "Oh, no, no, pray let me dry," implored the little bird. "The water cure is the only remedy for me." "When I am not well," said the Portuguese. "Amusement, too, is very beneficial. The fowls from the neighborhood will soon be here to pay you a visit. There are 2 Cochin Chinese amongst them. They wear feathers on their legs and are well educated. They have been brought from a great distance, and consequently I treat them with greater respect than I do the others." Then the fowls arrived, and the cock was polite enough today to keep from being rude. "You are a real songster," he said. "You do as much with your little voice as it is possible to do, but there requires more noise and shrillness in anyone who wishes it to be known who he is." The 2 Chinese were quite enchanted with the appearance of the singing bird. His feathers had been much ruffled by his bath, so that he seemed to them quite like a tiny Chinese fowl. "He's charming," they said to each other, and began a conversation with him in whispers, using the most aristocratic Chinese dialect. "We are of the same race as yourself," they said. The ducks, even the Portuguese, are all aquatic birds, as you must have noticed. You do not know us yet. Very few know us, or give themselves the trouble to make our acquaintance. Not even any of the fowls, though we are born to occupy a higher grade in society than most of them. But that does not disturb us. We quietly go on in our own way among the rest, whose ideas are certainly not ours, for we look at the bright side of things and only speak what is good, although that is sometimes very difficult to find where none exists. Except ourselves and the cock, there is not one in the yard who can be called talented or polite. It cannot even be said of the ducks, and we warn you, little bird, not to trust that one yonder, with the short tail feathers, for she is cunning. That curiously marked one, with the crooked stripes on her wings, is a mischief-maker, and never lets anyone have the last word, though she is always in the wrong. That fat duck yonder speaks evil of everyone, and that is against our principles. If we have nothing good to tell, we close our beaks. The Portuguese is the only one who has had any education, and with whom we can associate, but she is passionate, and talks too much about Portugal. I wonder what those two Chinese are whispering about, whispered one duck to another. They are always doing it, and it annoys me. We never speak to them. Now the drake came up, and he thought the little singing bird was a sparrow. "Well, I don't understand the difference," he said. "It appears to me all the same. He's only a plaything, and if people will have playthings, why let them, I say." "Don't take any notice of what he says," whispered the Portuguese. "He's very well in matters of business, and with him business is placed before everything. But now I shall lie down and have a little rest. It is a duty we owe to ourselves that we may be nice and fat when we come to be embalmed with sage and onions and apples." So she laid herself down in the sun and winked with one eye. She had a very comfortable place, and felt so comfortable that she fell asleep. The little singing bird busied himself for some time with his broken wing, and at last he lay down too, quite close to his protectress. The sun shone warm and bright, and he found out that it was a very good place. But the fowls of the neighborhood were all awake, and, to tell the truth, they had paid a visit to the duckyard simply and solely to find food for themselves. The Chinese were the first to leave, and the other fowls soon followed them. The witty little duck said of the Portuguese that the old lady was getting quite a doting ducky. All the other ducks laughed at this. "Doting ducky," they whispered. "Oh, that's too witty." And then they repeated the former joke about Portulac, and declared it was most amusing. Then they all lay down to have a nap. They had been lying asleep for some time, when suddenly something was thrown into the yard for them to eat. It came down with such a bang that the whole company started up and clapped their wings. The Portuguese awoke too, and rushed over to the other side. In so doing, she trod upon the little singing bird. "Tweet," he cried, "you trod very hard upon me, madam." "Well then, why do you lie in my way?" she retorted. "You must not be so touchy. I have nerves of my own, but I do not cry. Tweet." "Don't be angry," said the little bird. "The tweet slipped out of my beak unawares." The Portuguese did not listen to him, but began eating as fast as she could, and made a good meal. When she had finished, she lay down again, and the little bird, who wished to be amiable, began to sing. Chirp and twitter, the dewdrops glitter. In the hours of sunny spring, I'll sing my best, till I go to rest, with my head behind my wing. "Now I want rest after my dinner," said the Portuguese. "You must conform to the rules of the house while you are here. I want to sleep now." The little bird was quite taken aback, for he meant it kindly. When Madame awoke afterwards, there he stood before her with a little corn he had found, and laid it at her feet. But as she had not slept well, she was naturally in a bad temper. "Give that to a chicken," she said. and don't be always standing in my way." "Why are you angry with me?" replied the little singing bird. "What have I done?" "Done," repeated the Portuguese duck. "Your mode of expressing yourself is not very polite. I must call your attention to that fact." "It was sunshine here yesterday," said the little bird, "but today it is cloudy and the air is close." "You know very little about the weather, I fancy," she retorted. "The day is not over yet. Don't stand there, looking so stupid." "But you are looking at me just as the wicked eyes looked when I fell into the yard yesterday." "Impertinent creature!" exclaimed the Portuguese duck. "Would you compare me with the cat, that beast of prey? There's not a drop of malicious blood in me. I've taken your part, and now I'll teach you better manners." So saying, she made a bite at the little singing bird's head, and he fell dead on the ground. "Now, whatever is the meaning of this?" she said. "Could he not bear even such a little peck as I gave him? Then certainly he was not made for this world. I've been like a mother to him. I know that, for I've a good heart." Then the cock from the neighbouring yard stuck his head in and crowed with steam engine power. "You'll kill me with your crowing," she cried. "It's all your fault. He's lost his life, and I'm very near losing mine." "There's not much of him lying there," observed the cock. "Speak of him with respect," said the Portuguese duck, "for he had manners and education, and he could sing. He was affectionate and gentle, and that is as rare a quality in animals as in those who call themselves human beings." Then all the ducks came crowding round the little dead bird. Ducks have strong passions, whether they feel envy or pity. There was nothing to envy here, so they all showed a great deal of pity, even the two Chinese. "We shall never have another singing bird again amongst us. He was almost a Chinese," they whispered, and then they wept with such a noisy clucking sound that all the other fowls clucked too, but the ducks went about with redder eyes afterwards. "We have hearts of our own," they said. "Nobody can deny that." "Hearts," repeated the Portuguese. "Indeed you have, almost as tender as the ducks in Portugal." "Let us think of getting something to satisfy our hunger," said the drake. "That's the most important business. If one of our toys is broken, why, we have plenty more." The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she would have to be a real princess. He travelled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could he get what he wanted. There were princesses enough, but it was difficult to find out whether they were real ones. There was always something about them that was not as it should be. So he came home again and was sad, for he would have liked very much to have a real princess. One evening a terrible storm came on. There was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly a knocking was heard at the city gate, and the old king went to open it. It was a princess standing out there in front of the gate. But, good gracious, what a sight the rain and the wind had made her look! The water ran down from her hair and clothes. It ran down into the toes of her shoes and out again at the heels. And yet she said that she was a real princess. "Well, we'll soon find that out," thought the old queen. But she said nothing, went into the bedroom, took all the bedding off the bedstead, and laid a pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and laid them on the pea, and then 20 eider-down beds on top of the mattresses. On this the princess had to lie all night. In the morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly," said she. "I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. Heaven only knows what was in the bed, but I was lying on something hard, so that I am black and blue all over my body. It's horrible." Now they knew that she was a real princess, because she had felt the pea right through the 20 mattresses and the 20 eider-down beds. Nobody but a real princess could be as sensitive as that. So the prince took her for his wife, for now he knew that he had a real princess. And the pea was put in the museum, where it may still be seen, if no one has stolen it. There, that is a true story. The Psyche. In the fresh morning dawn, in the rosy air gleams a great star, the brightest star of the morning. His rays tremble on the white wall, as if he wished to write down on it what he can tell, what he has seen there and elsewhere during thousands of years in our rolling world. Let us hear one of his stories. A short time ago, the star's short time ago, is called among men centuries ago. My rays followed a young artist. It was in the city of the popes, in the world city, Rome. Much has been changed there in the course of time, but the changes have not come so quickly as the change from youth to old age. Then already the palace of the Caesars was a ruin, as it is now. Fig trees and laurels grew among the fallen marble columns, and in the desolate bathing halls, where the gilding still clings to the wall, the Colosseum was a gigantic ruin. The church bells sounded, the incense sent up its fragrant cloud, and through the streets marched processions with flaming tapers and glowing canopies. Holy Church was there, and art was held as a high and holy thing. In Rome lived the greatest painter in the world, Raphael. There also dwelt the first of sculptors, Michelangelo. Even the Pope paid homage to these two and honored them with a visit. Art was recognized and honored, and was rewarded also. But, for all that, everything great and splendid was not seen and known. In a narrow lane stood an old house. Once it had been a temple. A young sculptor now dwelt there. He was young and quite unknown. He certainly had friends, young artists like himself, young in spirit, young in hopes and thoughts. They told him he was rich in talent and an artist, but that he was foolish for having no faith in his own power, for he always broke what he had fashioned out of clay and never completed anything. And a work must be completed if it is to be seen and to bring money. "You are a dreamer," they went on to say to him, "and that's your misfortune. But the reason of this is that you have never lived, you have never tasted life, you have never enjoyed it in great wholesome draughts as it ought to be enjoyed. In youth one must mingle one's own personality with life, that they may become one. Look at the great master Raphael, whom the Pope honors and the world admires. He's no despiser of wine and bread. And he even appreciates the baker's daughter, the pretty Fornarina," added Angelo, one of the merriest of the young friends. Yes, they said a good many things of the kind according to their age and their reason. They wanted to draw the young artist out with them into the merry, wild life. The mad life, as it might also be called, and at certain times he felt an inclination for it. He had warm blood, a strong imagination, and could take part in the merry chat and laugh aloud with the rest, but what they called Raphael's merry life disappeared before him like a vapour when he saw the divine radiance that beamed forth from the pictures of the great master. And when he stood in the Vatican, before the forms of beauty which the masters had hewn out of marble thousands of years since, his breast swelled, and he felt within himself something high, something holy, something elevating, great and good, and he wished that he could produce similar forms from the blocks of marble. He wished to make a picture of that which was within him, stirring upward from his heart to the realms of the infinite. But how, and in what form? The soft clay was fashioned under his fingers into forms of beauty, but the next day he broke what he had fashioned according to his wont. One day he walked past one of those rich palaces of which Rome has many to show. He stopped before the great open portal and beheld a garden surrounded by cloistered walks. The garden bloomed with a goodly show of the fairest roses. Great white lilies with green juicy leaves shot upward from the marble basin in which the clear water was splashing, and a form glided past, the daughter of the princely house, graceful, delicate, and wonderfully fair. Such a form of female loveliness he had never before beheld. Yet stay, he had seen it, painted by Raphael, painted as a Psyche, in one of the Roman palaces. Yes, there it had been painted, but here it passed by him in living reality. The remembrance lived in his thoughts, in his heart. He went home to his humble room and modelled a Psyche of clay. It was the rich young Roman girl, the noble maiden, and for the first time he looked at his work with satisfaction. It had a meaning for him, for it was she, and the friends who saw his work shouted aloud for joy. They declared that this work was a manifestation of his artistic power, of which they had long been aware, and that now the world should be made aware of it too. The clay figure was lifelike and beautiful, but it had not the whiteness or the durability of marble. So they declared that the Psyche must henceforth live in marble. He already possessed a costly block of that stone. It had been lying for years, the property of his parents, in the courtyard. Fragments of glass, climbing weeds, and remains of artichokes had gathered about it and sullied its purity. But under the surface the block was as white as the mountain snow, and from this block the Psyche was to arise. Now, it happened one morning. The bright star tells nothing about this, but we know it occurred, that a noble Roman company came into the narrow lane. The carriage stopped at the top of the lane, and the company proceeded on foot towards the house to inspect the young sculptor's work, for they had heard him spoken of by chance. And who were these distinguished guests? Poor young man, or fortunate young man he might be called. The noble young lady stood in the room and smiled radiantly when her father said to her, "It is your living image." That smile could not be copied, any more than the look could be reproduced, the wonderful look which she cast upon the young artist. It was a fiery look that seemed at once to elevate and to crush him. "The Psyche must be executed in marble," said the wealthy patrician, and those were words of life. For the dead clay and the heavy block of marble, and words of life likewise for the deeply moved artist. "When the work is finished, I will purchase it," continued the rich noble. A new era seemed to have arisen in the poor studio. Life and cheerfulness gleamed there, and busy industry plied its work. The beaming morning star beheld how the work progressed. The clay itself seemed inspired since she had been there, and moulded itself in heightened beauty to a likeness of the well-known features. "Now I know what life is," cried the artist rejoicingly. "It is love. It is the lofty abandonment of self for the dawning of the beautiful in the soul. What my friends call life and enjoyment is a passing shadow. It is like bubbles among seething dregs, not the pure heavenly wine that consecrates us to life." The marble block was reared in its place. The chisel struck great fragments from it. The measurements were taken, points and lines were made. The mechanical part was executed, till gradually the stone assumed a human female form, a shape of beauty, and became converted into the Psyche, fair and glorious, a divine being in human shape. The heavy stone appeared as a gliding, dancing, airy Psyche, with the heavenly innocent smile, the smile that had mirrored itself in the soul of the young artist. The star of the roseate dawn beheld and understood what was stirring within the young man, and could read the meaning of the changing colour of his cheek, of the light that flashed from his eye, As he stood busily working, reproducing what had been put into his soul from above, "Thou art a master like those masters among the ancient Greeks," exclaimed his delighted friends. "Soon shall the whole world admire thy psyche." "My psyche," he repeated. "Yes, mine. She must be mine. I, too, am an artist, like those great men who are gone. Providence has granted me the boon, and has made me the equal of that lady of noble birth." And he knelt down and breathed a prayer of thankfulness as to heaven, and then he forgot. Heaven for her sake, for the sake of her picture in stone, for her Psyche, which stood there as if formed of snow, blushing in the morning dawn. He was to see her in reality, the living, graceful Psyche whose words sounded like music in his ears. He could now carry the news into the rich palace that the marble Psyche was finished. He betook himself thither, strode through the open courtyard, where the waters ran splashing from the dolphins' jaws into the marble basins, where the snowy lilies and the fresh roses bloomed in abundance. He stepped into the great lofty hall, whose walls and ceilings shone with gilding and bright colours and heraldic devices. Gaily dressed serving men, adorned with trappings like sleigh horses, walked to and fro, and some reclined at their ease upon the carved oak seats, as if they were the masters of the house. He told them what had brought him to the palace, and was conducted up the shining marble staircase, covered with soft carpets and adorned with many a statue. Then he went on through richly furnished chambers, over mosaic floors, amid gorgeous pictures. All this pomp and luxury seemed to weary him, but soon he felt relieved, for the princely old master of the house received him most graciously, almost heartily, and when he took his leave he was requested to step into the signora's apartment, for she too wished to see him. The servants led him through more luxurious halls and chambers into her room, where she appeared the chief and leading ornament. She spoke to him. No hymn of supplication, no holy chant could melt his soul like the sound of her voice. He took her hand and lifted it to his lips. No rose was softer, but a fire thrilled through him from this rose. A feeling of power came upon him, and words poured from his tongue. He knew not what he said. Does the crater of the volcano know that the glowing lava is pouring from it? He confessed what he felt for her. She stood before him, astonished, offended, proud, with contempt in her face, an expression of disgust, as if she had suddenly touched a cold, unclean reptile. Her cheeks reddened, her lips grew white, and her eyes flashed fire, though they were dark as the blackness of night. "Madman!" she cried. "Away! Begone!" And she turned her back upon him. Her beautiful face wore an expression like that of the stony countenance with the snaky locks. Like a stricken, fainting man, he tottered down the staircase and out into the street. Like a man walking in his sleep, he found his way back to his dwelling. Then he woke up to madness and agony and seized his hammer, swung it high in the air, and rushed forward to shatter the beautiful marble image. But in his pain he had not noticed that his friend Angelo stood beside him, and Angelo held back his arm with a strong grasp, crying, "Are you mad? What are you about?" They struggled together. Angelo was the stronger, and, with a deep sigh of exhaustion, the young artist threw himself into a chair. "What has happened?" asked Angelo. "Command yourself! Speak!" But what could he say? How could he explain? And as Angelo could make no sense of his friend's incoherent words, he forbore to question him further, and merely said, "Your blood grows thick from your eternal dreaming. Be a man, as all others are, and don't go on living in ideals, for that is what drives men crazy. A jovial feast will make you sleep quietly and happily. Believe me, the time will come when you will be old, and your sinews will shrink, And then, on some fine sunshiny day, when everything is laughing and rejoicing, you will lie there, a faded plant that will grow no more. I do not live in dreams, but in reality. Come with me. Be a man." And he drew the artist away with him. At this moment he was able to do so, for a fire ran in the blood of the young sculptor. A change had taken place in his soul. He felt a longing to tear from the old, the accustomed, to forget, if possible, his own individuality, and therefore it was that he followed Angelo. In an out-of-the-way suburb of Rome lay a tavern much visited by artists. It was built on the ruins of some ancient baths. The great yellow citrons hung down among the dark, shining leaves and covered a part of the old reddish-yellow walls. The tavern consisted of a vaulted chamber, almost like a cavern, in the ruins. A lamp burned there before the picture of the Madonna. A great fire gleamed on the hearth, and roasting and boiling was going on there without. Under the citron trees and laurels stood a few covered tables. The two artists were received by their friends with shouts of welcome. Little was eaten, but much was drunk, and the spirits of the company rose. Songs were sung and ditties were played on the guitar. Presently the solterero sounded, and the merry dance began. Two young Roman girls, who sat as models to the artists, took part in the dance and in the festivity. Two charming bacchantes were they, certainly not Psyches. Not delicate, beautiful roses, but fresh, hearty, glowing carnations. How hot it was on that day! Even after sundown it was hot. There was fire in the blood, fire in every glance, fire everywhere. The air gleamed with gold and roses, and life seemed like gold and roses. "At last you have joined us for once," said his friends. "Now let yourself be carried by the waves within and around you." "Never yet have I felt so well, so merry," cried the young artist. "You are right, you are all of you right. I was a fool, a dreamer. Man belongs to reality, and not to fancy." With songs and with sounding guitars, the young people returned that evening from the tavern. Through the narrow streets, the two glowing carnations, daughters of the Campagna, went with them. In Angelo's room, among a litter of coloured sketches, studies, and glowing pictures, the voices sounded mellower, but not less merrily. On the ground lay many a sketch that resembled the daughters of the Campagna in their fresh, hearty comeliness, but the two originals were far handsomer than their portraits. All the burners of the six-armed lamp flared and flamed, and the human flamed up from within, and appeared in the glare as if it were divine. Apollo, Jupiter, I feel myself raised to our heaven, to your glory. I feel as if the blossom of life were unfolding itself in my veins at this moment. Yes, the blossom unfolded itself, and then burst and fell, and an evil vapour arose from it, blinding the sight, leading astray the fancy. The firework of the senses went out, and it became dark. He was again in his own room. There he sat down on his bed and collected his thoughts. "Fie on thee!" These were the words that sounded out of his mouth from the depths of his heart. "Wretched man, go, begone!" And a deep, painful sigh burst from his bosom. "Away! Begone!" These, her words, the words of the living Psyche, echoed through his heart, escaped from his lips. He buried his head in the pillows, his thoughts grew confused, and he fell asleep. In the morning dawn he started up and collected his thoughts anew. What had happened? Had all the past been a dream? The visit to her, the feast at the tavern, the evening with the purple carnations of the Campagna? No. It was all real, a reality he had never before experienced. In the purple air gleamed a bright star, and its beams fell upon him and upon the marble Psyche. He trembled as he looked at that picture of immortality, and his glance seemed impure to him. He threw the cloth over the statue and then touched it once more to unveil the form. But he was not able to look again at his own work. Gloomy, quiet, absorbed in his own thoughts, he sat there through the long day. He heard nothing of what was going on around him, and no man guessed what was passing in this human soul. And days and weeks went by, but the nights passed more slowly than the days. The flashing star beheld him one morning as he rose, pale and trembling with fever, from his sad couch. Then he stepped towards the statue, threw back the covering, took one long, sorrowful gaze at his work, and then, almost sinking beneath the burden, he dragged the statue out into the garden. In that place was an old, dry well. Now, nothing but a hole. Into this he cast the Psyche, threw earth in above her, and covered up the spot with twigs and nettles. Away! Begone! Such was the short epitaph he spoke. The star beheld all this from the pink morning sky, and its beam trembled upon two great tears upon the pale feverish cheeks of the young man, and soon it was said that he was sick unto death, and he lay stretched upon a bed of pain. The convent. Brother Ignatius visited him as a physician and a friend, and brought him words of comfort, of religion, and spoke to him of the peace and happiness of the Church, of the sinfulness of man, of rest and mercy to be found in heaven. And the words fell like warm sunbeams upon a teeming soil. The soil smoked and sent up clouds of mist, fantastic pictures, pictures in which there was reality. And from these floating islands he looked across at human life. He found it vanity and delusion, and vanity and delusion it had been to him. They told him that art was a sorcerer, betraying us to vanity and to earthly lusts, that we are false to ourselves, unfaithful to our friends, unfaithful towards heaven, and that the serpent was always repeating within us, "Eat, and thou shalt become as God." And it appeared to him as if now, for the first time, he knew himself, and had found the way that leads to truth and to peace. In the church was the light and the brightness of God. In the monk's cell he should find the rest through which the tree of human life might grow on into eternity. Brother Ignatius strengthened his longings, and the determination became firm within him. A child of the world became a servant of the church. The young artist renounced the world and retired into the cloister. The brothers came forward affectionately to welcome him, and his inauguration was as a Sunday feast. Heaven seemed to him to dwell in the sunshine of the church and to beam upon him from the holy pictures and from the cross. And when, in the evening, at the sunset hour, he stood in his little cell, and, opening the window, looked out upon old Rome, upon the desolated temples and the great dead Colosseum. When he saw all this in its spring garb, when the acacias bloomed and the ivy was fresh and roses burst forth everywhere, and the citron and orange were in the height of their beauty, and the palm trees waved their branches, then he felt a deeper emotion than had ever yet thrilled through him. The quiet open Campagna spread itself forth towards the blue snow-covered mountains, which seemed to be painted in the air, all the outlines melting into each other, breathing peace and beauty, floating, dreaming, and all appearing like a dream. Yes, this world was a dream, and the dream lasts for hours and may return for hours, but convent life is a life of years, long years, and many years. From within comes much that renders men sinful and impure. He fully realized the truth of this. What flames arose up in him at times! What a source of evil, of that which we would not, welled up continually. He mortified his body, but the evil came from within. One day, after the lapse of many years, he met Angelo, who recognized him. "Man!" exclaimed Angelo. "Yes, it is thou. Art thou happy now? Thou hast sinned against God." and cast away his boon from thee, hast neglected thy mission in this world. Read the parable of the entrusted talent. The master, who spoke that parable, spoke the truth. What hast thou gained? What hast thou found? Dost thou not fashion for thyself a religion and a dreamy life after thine own idea, as almost all do? Suppose all this is a dream, a fair delusion. Get thee away from me, Satan, said the monk, and he quitted Angelo. There is a devil, a personal devil. This day I have seen him, said the monk to himself. Once I extended a finger to him, and he took my whole hand. But now, he sighed, the evil is within me, and it is in yonder man. But it does not bow him down. He goes abroad with head erect, and enjoys his comfort. And I grasped at comfort in the consolations of religion. If it were nothing but a consolation, supposing everything here were, like the world I have quitted, only a beautiful fancy, a delusion, like the beauty of the evening clouds, like the misty blue of the distant hills. When you approach them, they are very different. O eternity! Thou actest like the great calm ocean that beckons us and fills us with expectation. And when we embark upon thee, we sink, disappear, and cease to be. Delusion, away with it, begone. And tearless, but sunk in bitter reflection, he sat upon his hard couch and then knelt down. Before whom? Before the stone cross fastened to the wall? No, it was only habit that made him take this position. The more deeply he looked into his own heart, the blacker did the darkness seem. Nothing within, nothing without. This life squandered and cast away. And this thought rolled and grew like a snowball until it seemed to crush him. I can confide my griefs to none. I may speak to none of the gnawing worm within. My secret is my prisoner. If I let the captive escape, I shall be his. And the godlike power that dwelt within him suffered and strove. O Lord, my Lord, he cried in his despair, be merciful and grant me faith. I threw away the gift thou hadst vouchsafed to me. I left my mission unfulfilled. I lacked strength, and strength thou didst not give me. Immortality? The psyche in my breast, away with it. It shall be buried like that. Psyche, the best gleam of my life, never will it arise out of its grave. The star glowed in the roseate air. The star that shall surely be extinguished and pass away while the soul still lives on. Its trembling beam fell upon the white wall, but it wrote nothing there upon being made perfect in God, nothing of the hope of mercy, of the reliance on the divine love that thrills through the heart of the believer. The psyche within can never die. Shall it live in consciousness? Can the incomprehensible happen? Yes, yes. My being is incomprehensible. Thou art unfathomable, O Lord. Thy whole world is incomprehensible, a wonder-work of power, of glory, and of love. His eyes gleamed, and then closed in death. The tolling of the church bell was the last sound that echoed above him, above the dead man, and they buried him, covering him with earth that had been brought from Jerusalem, and in which was mingled the dust of many of the pious dead. When years had gone by, his skeleton was dug up. As the skeletons of the monks who had died before him had been, it was clad in a brown frock. A rosary was put into the bony hand, and the form was placed among the ranks of other skeletons in the cloisters of the convent, and the sun shone without, while within the censers were waved and the mass was celebrated. And years rolled by. The bones fell asunder and became mingled with others. Skulls were piled up till they formed an outer wall around the church, and there lay also his head in the burning sun. For many dead were there, and no one knew their names, and his name was forgotten also. And see, something was moving in the sunshine, in the sightless cavernous eyes. What might that be? A sparkling lizard moved about in the skull, gliding in and out through the sightless holes. The lizard now represented all the life left in that head, in which once great thoughts, bright dreams, the love of art and of the glorious had arisen, whence hot tears had rolled down, where hope and immortality had had their being. The lizard sprang away and disappeared, and the skull itself crumbled to pieces and became dust among dust. Centuries passed away. The bright star gleamed unaltered, radiant and large, as it had gleamed for thousands of years, and the air glowed red with tints fresh as roses, crimson like blood. There, where once had stood the narrow lane containing the ruins of the temple, a nunnery was now built. A grave was being dug in the convent garden for a young nun who had died and was to be laid in the earth this morning. The spade struck against a hard substance. It was a stone that shone dazzling white. A block of marble soon appeared, a rounded shoulder was laid bare, and now the spade was plied with a more careful hand, and presently a female head was seen, and butterflies' wings. Out of the grave in which the young nun was to be laid, they lifted, in the rosy morning, a wonderful statue of a Psyche carved in white marble. "How beautiful! How perfect it is!" cried the spectators. "A relic of the best period of art!" And who could the sculptor have been? No one knew, no one remembered him, except the bright star that had gleamed for thousands of years. The star had seen the course of that life on earth, and knew of the man's trials, of his weakness. In fact, that he had been but human. The man's life had passed away, his dust had been scattered abroad, as dust is destined to be, but the result of his noblest striving, the glorious work that gave token of the divine element within him. The Psyche that never dies, that lives beyond posterity. The brightness even of this earthly Psyche remained here after him, and was seen and acknowledged and appreciated. The bright morning star in the roseate air threw its glancing ray downward upon the Psyche, and upon the radiant countenances of the admiring spectators, who here beheld the image of the soul portrayed in marble. What is earthly will pass away and be forgotten, and the star in the vast firmament knows it. What is heavenly will shine brightly through posterity, and when the ages of posterity are past, the Psyche, the soul will still live on. The puppet show man. On board a steamer I once met an elderly man with such a merry face that, if it was really an index of his mind, he must have been the happiest fellow in creation, and indeed he considered himself so, for I heard it from his own mouth. He was a Dane, the owner of a travelling theatre. He had all his company with him in a large box, for he was the proprietor of a puppet show. His inborn cheerfulness, he said, had been tested by a member of the Polytechnic institution, and the experiment had made him completely happy. I did not at first understand all this, but afterwards he explained the whole story to me, and here it is. I was giving a representation, he said, in the hall of the posting house in the little town of Slagelse. There was a splendid audience, entirely juvenile excepting 2 respectable matrons. All at once, a person in black, of student-like appearance, entered the room and sat down. He laughed aloud at the telling points and applauded quite at the proper time. This was a very unusual spectator for me, and I felt anxious to know who he was. I heard that he was a member of the Polytechnic institution in Copenhagen, who had been sent out to lecture to the people in the provinces. Punctually at 8 o'clock, my performance closed, for children must go early to bed, and a manager must also consult the convenience of the public. At 9 o'clock, the lecturer commenced his lecture and his experiments, and then I formed a part of his audience. It was wonderful both to hear and to see. The greater part of it was beyond my comprehension, but it led me to think that if we men can acquire so much, we must surely be intended to last longer than the little span which extends only to the time when we are hidden away under the earth. His experiments were quite miracles on a small scale, and yet the explanations flowed as naturally as water from his lips. At the time of Moses and the prophets, such a man would have been placed among the sages of the land. In the Middle Ages they would have burnt him at the stake. All night long I could not sleep, and the next evening, when I gave another performance and the lecturer was present, I was in one of my best moods. I once heard of an actor who, when he had to act the part of a lover, always thought of one particular lady in the audience. He only played for her and forgot all the rest of the house. And now the Polytechnic lecturer was my she, my only auditor, for whom alone I played. When the performance was over and the puppets removed behind the curtain, the Polytechnic lecturer invited me into his room to take a glass of wine. He talked of my comedies and I of his science, and I believe we were both equally pleased. But I had the best of it, for there was much in what he did that he could not always explain to me. For instance, why a piece of iron which is rubbed on a cylinder should become magnetic. How does this happen? The magnetic sparks come to it, but how? It is the same with people in the world. They are rubbed about on this spherical globe till the electric spark comes upon them. And then we have a Napoleon, or a Luther, or someone of the kind. The whole world is but a series of miracles, said the lecturer, but we are so accustomed to them that we call them everyday matters. And he went on explaining things to me till my skull seemed lifted from my brain. And I declared that were I not such an old fellow, I would at once become a member of the Polytechnic institution, that I might learn to look at the bright side of everything, although I was one of the happiest of men. One of the happiest, said the lecturer, as if the idea pleased him. Are you really happy? Yes, I replied, for I am welcomed in every town when I arrive with my company. But I certainly have one wish which sometimes weighs upon my cheerful temper like a mountain of lead. I should like to become the manager of a real theatre and the director of a real troupe of men and women. I understand, he said. You would like to have life breathed into your puppets so that they might be living actors, and you their director. And would you then be quite happy? I said I believe so, but he did not, and we talked it over in all manner of ways, yet could not agree on the subject. However, the wine was excellent, and we clanked our glasses together as we drank. There must have been magic in it, or I should most certainly become tipsy. But that did not happen, for my mind seemed quite clear, and, indeed, a kind of sunshine filled the room, and beamed from the eyes of the Polytechnic lecturer. It made me think of the old stories when the gods, in their immortal youth, wandered upon this earth and paid visits to mankind. I said so to him, and he smiled, and I could have sworn that he was one of these ancient deities in disguise, or, at all events, that he belonged to the race of the gods. The result seemed to prove I was right in my suspicions, for it was arranged that my highest wish should be granted, that my puppets were to be gifted with life, and that I was to be the manager of a real company. We drank to my success, and clanked our glasses. Then he packed all my dolls into the box, and fastened it on my back, and I felt as if I were spinning round in a circle, and presently found myself lying on the floor. I remember that quite well. And then the whole company sprang from the box. The spirit had come upon us all. The puppets had become distinguished actors at least, so they said themselves, and I was their director. When all was ready for the first representation, the whole company requested permission to speak to me before appearing in public. The dancing lady said the house could not be supported unless she stood on one leg, for she was a great genius, and begged to be treated as such. The lady who acted the part of the queen expected to be treated as a queen off the stage, as well as on it, or else she said she should get out of practice. The man whose duty it was to deliver a letter gave himself as many airs as he who took the part of first lover in the piece. He declared that the inferior parts were as important as the great ones, and deserving equal consideration as parts of an artistic whole. The hero of the piece would only play in a part containing points likely to bring down the applause of the house. The prima donna would only act when the lights were red, for she declared that a blue light did not suit her complexion. It was like a company of flies in a bottle, and I was in the bottle with them, for I was their director. My breath was taken away, my head whirled, and I was as miserable as a man could be. It was quite a novel, strange set of beings among whom I now found myself. I only wished I had them all in my box again, and that I had never been their director, so I told them roundly that, after all, they were nothing but puppets, and then they killed me. After a while I found myself lying on my bed in my room, but how I got there, or how I got away at all from the Polytechnic professor, he may perhaps know. I don't. The moon shone upon the floor, the box lay open, and the dolls were all scattered about in great confusion. But I was not idle. I jumped off the bed, and into the box they all had to go, some on their heads, some on their feet. Then I shut down the lid, and seated myself upon the box. "Now you'll have to stay," said I, "and I shall be cautious how I wish you flesh and blood again." I felt quite light. My cheerfulness had returned, and I was the happiest of mortals. The Polytechnic professor had fully cured me. I was as happy as a king, and went to sleep on the box. Next morning, correctly speaking, it was noon, for I slept remarkably late that day. I found myself still sitting there, in happy consciousness that my former wish had been a foolish one. I inquired for the Polytechnic professor, but he had disappeared like the Greek and Roman gods. From that time I have been the happiest man in the world. I am a happy director, for none of my company ever grumble, nor the public either, for I always make them merry. I can arrange my pieces just as I please. I choose out of every comedy what I like best, and no one is offended. Plays that are neglected now. A Days by the great public were ran after 30 years ago, and listened to, till the tears ran down the cheeks of the audience. These are the pieces I bring forward. I place them before the little ones, who cry over them as Papa and Mamma used to cry 30 years ago, but I make them shorter, for the youngsters don't like long speeches, and if they have anything mournful, they like it to be over quickly. The races, a prize, or rather 2 prizes, a great one and a small one, had been awarded for the greatest swiftness in running, not in a single race, but for the whole year. "I obtained the first prize," said the hare. Justice must still be carried out, even when one has relations and good friends among the prize committee. But that the snail should have received the second prize, I consider almost an insult to myself. "No," said the fence rail, who had been a witness at the distribution of prizes, "there should be some consideration for industry and perseverance. I have heard many respectable people say so, and I can quite understand it. The snail certainly took half a year to get over the threshold of the door, but he injured himself and broke his collarbone by the haste he made. He gave himself up entirely to the race and ran with his house on his back, which was all, of course, very praiseworthy, and therefore he obtained the second prize. "I think I ought to have had some consideration too," said the swallow. "I should imagine no one can be swifter in soaring and flight than I am. And how far I have been! Far, far away." "Yes, that is your misfortune," said the fence rail. "You are so fickle, so unsettled, you must always be travelling about into foreign lands when the cold commences here. You have no love of fatherland in you. There can be no consideration for you. But now, if I had been lying the whole winter in the moor," said the swallow, "and suppose I slept the whole time, would that be taken into account?" "Bring a certificate from the old moorhen," said he, "that you have slept away half your time in fatherland, then you will be treated with some consideration." "I deserved the first prize, and not the second," said the snail. "I know so much at least that the hare only ran from cowardice and because he thought there was danger in delay. I, on the other hand, made running the business of my life, and have become a cripple in the service. If anyone had a first prize, it ought to have been myself. But I do not understand chattering and boasting. On the contrary, I despise it." And the snail spat at them with contempt. "I am able to affirm with word of oath that each prize, at least those for which I voted, was given with just and proper consideration," said the old boundary post in the wood, who was a member of the committee of judges. "I always act with due order, consideration, and calculation. 7 times have I already had the honor to be present at the distribution of the prizes and to vote, but today is the first time I have been able to carry out my will. I always reckon the first prize by going through the alphabet from the beginning, and the second by going through from the end. Be so kind as to give me your attention, and I will explain to you how I reckon from the beginning. The 8th letter from A is H, and there we have H for hare. Therefore I awarded to the hare the first prize. The 8th letter from the end of the alphabet is S, and therefore the snail received the second prize. Next year, the letter I will have its turn for the first prize, and the letter R for the second. "I should really have voted for myself," said the mule, "if I had not been one of the judges on the committee. Not only the rapidity with which advance is made, but every other quality should have due consideration, as, for instance, how much weight a candidate is able to draw. But I have not brought this quality forward now, nor the sagacity of the hare in his flight, nor the cunning with which he suddenly springs aside and doubles, to lead people on a false track, thinking he has concealed himself. No, there is something else on which more stress should be laid, and which ought not be left unnoticed. I mean that which mankind call the beautiful. It is on the beautiful that I particularly fix my eyes. I observe the well-grown ears of the hare. It is a pleasure to me to observe how long they are. It seemed as if I saw myself again in the days of my childhood, and so I voted for the hare." "Buzz," said the fly, "there, I'm not going to make a long speech, but I wish to say something about hares. I have really overtaken more than one hare when I have been seated on the engine in front of a railway train. I often do so. One can then so easily judge of one's own swiftness. Not long ago, I crushed the hind legs of a young hare. He had been running a long time before the engine. He had no idea that I was travelling there. At last he had to stop in his career, and the engine ran over his hind legs and crushed them. For I set upon it. I left him lying there and rode on farther. I call that conquering him, but I do not want the prize. It really seems to me, thought the wild rose, though she did not express her opinion aloud. It is not in her nature to do so, though it would have been quite as well if she had. It certainly seems to me that the sunbeam ought to have had the honor of receiving the first prize. The sunbeam flies in a few minutes along the immeasurable path from the sun to us. It arrives in such strength that all nature awakes to loveliness and beauty. We roses blush and exhale fragrance in its presence. Our worshipful judges don't appear to have noticed this at all. Were I the sunbeam, I would give each one of them a sunstroke, but that would only make them mad, and they are mad enough already. I only hope, continued the rose, that peace may reign in the wood. It is glorious to bloom, to be fragrant, and to live in story and in song. The sunbeam will outlive us all. What is the first prize? Asked the earthworm, who had overslept the time and only now came up. It contains a free admission to a cabbage garden, replied the mule. I proposed that as one of the prizes. The hare most decidedly must have it, and I, as an active and thoughtful member of the committee, took especial care that the prize should be one of advantage to him, so now he is provided for. The snail can now sit on the fence and lick up moss and sunshine. He has also been appointed one of the first judges of swiftness in racing. It is worth much to know that one of the numbers is a man of talent in the thing men call a committee. I must say, I expect much in the future. We have already made such a good beginning.